Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's conference, Human Rights Due Diligence. What is the role and responsibility of different actors along the cocoa supply chain? This conference is co-hosted by the Swiss Platform for Sustainable Cocoa, Beyond Chocolate, and the German Initiative on Sustainable Cocoa. As you all know, to protect human rights within their supply chain is one of the key challenges for companies in sustainability. And for this adequate human rights protection, a good human rights due diligence process is necessary. But such a human rights due diligence process constitutes a particular challenge, particularly for small and medium enterprises and for those companies that do not have a direct relationship to the producers. So the objective of today's conference is to discuss the roles and responsibilities of all the different actors along the cocoa supply chain, be it producers, traders, retailers, standard setting organizations, multi-stakeholder initiatives, or governments both in the producing countries and here in Europe. As you will see from the agenda, could you please show the agenda? Today's conference will be divided into 4 sections. So first of all, we will have an introduction and input session where we will learn more about the basics of human rights due diligence and human rights protection. Second, we will take further these thoughts in a panel discussion where we want to focus on the different roles and responsibilities of all the different actors along the cocoa supply chain. Then we will have our lunch break from approximately 12:30 to 1:15. And after the lunch break, we will come and rejoin together in breakout sessions from 1:15 to 2 o'clock. And at the end, we will have a wrap-up session where we will bring together all what we learned in the panel in the breakout sessions, and where we give an outlook of what we learned from this conference and how we will take it forward. So remember the lunch break, approximately 12:30 to 1:15. What is really important for the success of this conference is that you feel and behave as if we were sitting together in one conference room. That means be active, participate. If you have any concerns, if you have any questions, please join us and join the discussions with your questions and ideas. To make this possible, please respect the following things that you already know from all the conferences that you participated in the last couple of months. First of all, please mute your microphone if you do not wish to speak actively. Second, you have 2 ways in which you can contribute to the discussion. First, obviously, by writing into the chat. Remember to address everyone, and not only me or some of the technical experts, or lift your hands. In order to lift your hands, you need to activate the list of participants. You do this with clicking on the button on the right in your window. So activate the participants list. And there, when you see your name, there should be a hand. If you want to try it out, can I see some hands? Oh, wow. Okay, so many hands. Perfect. That works fine. Perfect. So use the lift of hand function and now lower your hand, please, again. Thirdly, just a reminder, you agreed that this session will be recorded, but it is recorded anonymously, at least as long as if you do not enter into the discussion with video and with tone, obviously. So it is anonymously unless you join the discussion by uttering anything with your video and voice. If you should encounter any technical problems during the event, please contact Marlene Münch at compolicy.de, or here the name is Virtual Events. And now let us try to engage a little bit. Next slide. So please open your browser, type in www.menti.com, enter the code 8753785. So go open your browser, go to www.menti.com, enter the code 8753785. You also see it in the chat, the code, and then respond to the question. So which stakeholder group are you part of? At the moment, NGOs are leading. but these are only 13 responses. I guess there are more participants. We should have approximately 100 respondents. So please use this function. And it's not only a game. We will use it later on at a very, very critical stage. So if you now thought, oh, Jesus, I don't want to play with this. Okay, that looks much better. So we have many representatives from the chocolate industry, NGOs, and standard setting organizations, and others. Maybe it needs to refresh. We refresh the slide. Perfect. So now we have approximately 60 responses, but it's the same picture. It feels a little bit like US elections. So 19 representatives out of these 59 from the chocolate industry, then many NGO representatives from standard setting organizations, public institutions, knowledge institutions, and others. So I think that this composition of stakeholders already signifies how relevant this conference is and how important it is to talk about the different roles of all the different actors. My name is Christian Thoren. I'm the moderator of the event, and I'd now like to hand over to the host of this event. And the fact that this event is hosted by 3 organizations already signifies a great achievement, because the movement towards more human rights protection in the global cocoa supply chain isn't a one stakeholder endeavor or a one country endeavor, but it's cross stakeholders and cross country. So first of all, I would like to welcome Filippo Viglio. He's the president of the Swiss Platform for Sustainable Cocoa. In his full-time job, he's managing director at the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. I would also like to welcome Wolf Kropp-Büttner. He worked for more than 20 years in the management of 2 Bremen-based chocolate manufacturers, Hershey's Chocolate and Fedora. Since 2013, he has been privately committed to a sustainable cocoa sector. He is the chairman of the board of the German Initiative on Sustainable Cocoa. And thirdly, I would like to welcome Philippe Desselier. He's the CEO of the Belgian chocolate and praline brand Leonidas. Since April this year, he is the chairman of Beyond Chocolate. Filippo, please start first.
Thank you, Christian. Just checking, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Good morning, everybody. Very pleased to meet you. Delighted to be here with you. My name is Filippo Viglio. I'm the president of the Swiss Platform for Sustainable Cocoa. A warm welcome also on behalf of the Swiss Platform to today's session. This is actually the first joint event of the 3 European platforms, Beyond Chocolate in Belgium, the German Initiative for Sustainable Cocoa, and the Swiss platform Swissco. And I would also like to extend on behalf of all of us a warm welcome this morning to our guests from the Dutch Initiative on Sustainable Cocoa, which will shortly be joining our memorandum of understanding. I'm pleased to be opening this event alongside my colleagues from Belgium and Germany as the incoming or newly elected president of Swissco a few weeks ago. And I really look forward, I wish to emphasize, to working with all of you to advance sustainability across the cocoa value chain, which is so dear to all of us. I'm delighted to hear just before the session today that we've got about 180 participants confirmed to join across today, which is of course a great statistic, but also of course difficult times. So I hope this message and this note from me finds you well and in relatively good health across your families, loved ones, and of course co-workers. As Christian mentioned, over the next few hours, we will basically be looking at the role and responsibility of different actors along the cocoa supply chain, including multi-stakeholder initiatives such as ours across Europe that are represented on the line today. We'll also, of course, listen to different opinions on the matter, and we'll also be exposed to a number of ideas and tools all along the way for advancing that kind of collaboration. So, of course, the importance of the human rights due diligence topic in and of itself is underlined also by the high-level representation of the EU this morning. A little bit later today, I think at the bottom of the hour, we will have, and we are honored to have Didier Reynders, the European Commissioner for Justice, who will share his insights on this particular topic. And I would like to also warmly welcome, on behalf of all of us, the other speakers and panelists all across the day, and allow me in this particular context to welcome Mr. Emmanuel Opoku from the Ghana Cocoa Board, who will also be joining us in one particular session. So with that said, again, a warm welcome. Delighted to be joining this effort across the cocoa value chain in Europe. Please count on Switzerland. I'll be back shortly with an overview actually on what's going on in Switzerland with regard to responsible business. There is quite an animated debate around a referendum later this month. But with that said, I would like to hand over to my colleague Wolf Kropp-Büttner, chairman of the German initiative. So Mr. Kropp-Büttner, over to you. I haven't formally met you yet, but pleased to meet you and looking forward to your thoughts.
Yes, good morning, everybody. Filippo, thank you very much. And we are happy to have you here in our circle. And I think we will continue the good collaboration between all of our platforms. We from GISCO, we are quite overwhelmed and by the very good response we have for this first joint event on our 3 European platforms. Although this is the first joint event, the cooperation between the 3 platforms has some history already. It started with a joint memorandum of understanding between GISCO and Swissco in 2018 and was strengthened this year in July when the 3 platforms signed a joint memorandum of understanding in order to join forces for a more sustainable cocoa sector. So we are very happy now that the Dutch initiative of sustainable cocoa, which was already in founding in this summer, now joined to our team, and I am convinced that this will further strengthen our very good collaboration. A joint effort is key to overcome the most pressing challenges in the cocoa sector. In this context, I would like to emphasize one important area of our collaboration, the development of a joint monitoring system based on harmonized indicators. We learned very strongly that even as generally spoken, we all have the same objectives, to find common indicators in detail was not an easy one. We are still in the phase to align the system to make it as slim and uniform as possible. However, a first joint monitoring round is planned for the first months of next year, and it is a big step forward to monitor and to report on the progress made towards the elimination of child labor, ending poverty of cocoa farmers, establishing traceability along the cocoa value chain, and ending deforestation. We all know that a monitoring system is not changing anything. It has to be done by the active players of the value chain. Thus, I would like to use the possibility here to encourage all of you to actively contribute to this effort. As multi-stakeholder initiatives, a core purpose is to offer a platform for exchange. With regards to the very important topic of human rights due diligence and shared responsibility among the value chain, many questions remain still open. I look forward to discussing these open questions with you today and hope that we could find perhaps some answers. With this, I hand over to my colleague from Beyond Chocolate, Philippe Desilliers. We have a good meeting, hopefully, today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wolf. Thank you, Filippo, also. I'm really happy also to be here today, and hello to everybody. And as you see, the 3 platforms are speaking the same language, because and you can see also that the different national initiatives on sustainable cocoa succeeded in bringing together a wide variety of stakeholders to empower them to make their contribution to our common ambitions of enabling living incomes for cocoa producers and ending child labor and deforestation. And I think that in this quite difficult time now, it's more important than ever to continue on our long-term objective, and to have a long-term objective, to reach a long-term objective, we have to start today. From Beyond Chocolate, so the Belgian platform, we have more than 50 members who are engaged, and 95% of the Belgian chocolate market is totally committed. I want also to use this, to take this opportunity to thank the Commissioner for Justice, Didier Reynders, for his presence today, because that's a really important sign for us, but also, and probably more importantly, for what he announced in April. Last April, Mr. Reynders announced that the Commission will introduce a legislative initiative next year on mandatory due diligence for companies. This is really important news and totally in line with the public call for HRDD made by a group of large cocoa companies at the end of 2019. And I want to tell you that HRDD is a great opportunity for this cocoa sector. On the same time, cocoa sector is really well advanced and is also probably a great opportunity for HRDD. Having said that, we see that today the high attendance is a clear sign that the discussion is really well advanced in our sector. Our meeting today will aim, I hope, at contributing to build a common understanding of the role and responsibilities of the different actors, different stakeholders along the supply chain, but also make the different opinions transparent, and lastly, identify practical tools for collaboration. I really hope that we will have a great meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Filippo, Wolf, and Philippe. So, yeah, the objectives are set. We are here to work together to ensuring that we end child labor and deforestation, that we think harder about what role and responsibilities do the different actors in the supply chain play, and think about ways and tools in which we really could make this happen, because there are so many companies and so many stakeholders that are wanting that this happens. Now I would like to give the word back to Filippo. Filippo already mentioned that in Switzerland there are some interesting developments. So Filippo, what is this all about?
Thank you, Christian. And I know I've got about 10 minutes before the EU Commissioner speaks, so I'll try to do something in terms of synthesizing a long-standing debate within Swiss society around responsible business conduct, which is culminating in a vote, a popular vote on the 29th of November here in our country. So allow me really to share just with you a brief overview. It's an overview, a factual overview around the developments on human rights and environmental due diligence in Switzerland, doing that with a number of remarks that I have prepared, but also doing that along the three pillars that you see outlined here. So in any case, allow me also at the outset, maybe mirroring what my colleagues did, to underline that the 60 plus members of our Swiss platforms are committed to enhancing the social, environmental, and economic sustainability of the cocoa production value chain. And part of this commitment entails, of course, the area of human rights. Our platform encourages our members to implement the UN guiding principles on a cross-sectoral level. As part of our 6 principles for sustainable cocoa production, we position the promotion of decent living conditions and the contribution to a living income for cocoa farmers and their families. And we position as well the prevention of the worst forms of child labor as one of our principles. So, as you will no doubt have gathered across discussions and news and exchanges across our countries, Switzerland is, as I mentioned, in the last stretch of this robust, to put it very diplomatically, democratic debate across the past decade on questions around responsible business conduct. And before I dive into highlights, give me just a few seconds to give you a little bit of the overview around developments in this area so far, because we're looking back at a number of years. So we've got 2015, the Federal Council issuing a CSR position paper, an action plan that includes the expectation that Swiss companies respect human rights and protect the environments, also when operating abroad, also when doing business abroad. The year after, 2016, the Federal Council issued a report on the Swiss strategy to implement the UN guiding principles for business and human rights, including a national action plan. And the same year, 2016, there was also the issuing by the Federal Council of a report on the green economy, in which the action plan on green economy was further developed, originally out of 2013. So against this background, multi-stakeholder initiatives such as ours were given an important role. And this leads me basically to 2017, when we had 40 organizations that signed a declaration of intent, which laid then the foundations for Swissco. So it's an important context to give you, because we're basically going back now to 2020 or going forward, as I explained you. So as I mentioned, in a few days, this vote, with the above context in mind, allow me just to give you a little bit of overview on the why, on the what, and the how. And in doing so, I really wish to emphasize that I'll remain factual and impartial. Swissco in this particular debate is impartial in this current democratic debate and will remain so. I really wish to emphasize this part as a multi-stakeholder initiative. Arguments in favor or against the initiative are being positioned by our members across stakeholder groups, but not by the platform. So what is on the table? And to do that, I will basically do this along the three levels here. What does the initiative call for? What happens if the initiative is accepted? But of course, also what happens if the initiative is not accepted? And I'll do that just with some sort of top line overview. And I'm happy to share the more sort of fundamental parts in writing via our colleagues if you're interested. So in a nutshell, while Swiss companies are expected to uphold human rights and comply with environmental standards, not just in Switzerland, but also when doing business abroad, for the authors of this initiative, these measures do not go far enough. Under the norms regulating public initiatives in our direct democratic system, they have therefore launched this responsible business initiative, which aims, in a nutshell, to introduce new statutory obligations for Swiss businesses. The text that is submitted to voters on the 29th of November is most notably based on the UN guiding principles and demands that companies that are domiciled in our country ensure respect for human rights and internationally recognized environmental standards, and that the companies they control do the same. There are two ways of doing this, through direct ties, that is through a subsidiary legally affiliated with the company, or through economic ties, that is a third party whose activities are heavily dependent on the parent company. So if a violation is committed by one of its subsidiaries or controlled third companies abroad, a Swiss company is liable for it, unless it can prove that it exercised due diligence to prevent the damage. In other words, it must prove that it acted upstream to ensure that the two principles mentioned above are not violated. So the initiative opens up the possibility for injured parties abroad to initiate civil proceedings in Switzerland to obtain compensation, even if this deviates from the rules of international private law and without first trying to get the case judged and managed and handled by the normally competent court. So this is what the initiative calls for. Secondly, what happens if the initiative is accepted at the end of this month, Sunday in 20 days? So important to underline, if you think US elections are complicated, Swiss elections are certainly not easy in that regard. You don't need only a majority of voters, but you also need a majority of our country's 26 cantons for the initiative to pass at the ballot box. That's an important fundamental part of our constitutional system. So under the Swiss system of direct democracy, the approval by voters of a people's initiative leads to a change in our constitution, which then prompts a series of legal amendments, sort of a trickle down of legal amendments to be decided by Parliament at a later stage. So very concretely, in the case of violation of human rights or the environment committed abroad by a subsidiary of a Swiss company, the civil procedure would be as follows, and forgive me a little bit of legalistic elements, but they are necessary. The victims would first have to prove a damage and prove that the actions of the subsidiary in question were a violation of internationally recognized human rights, or international environmental standards. For example, in the case of pollution, according to the standards of the World Health Organization. The injured parties will also have to demonstrate the causality between the illegal act and the damage suffered. That being said, a fault of the accused Swiss company has not to be proven by the claimants. If the accused company cannot prove that all measures have been taken to prevent the damage, it will be held liable. So one of the main sticking points of the initiative, as you can imagine, is to what extent Swiss-based firms can be made liable for damages caused by the practices or by the practices of controlled companies. There is disagreement, most notably over whether all Swiss SMEs, a huge constituency in the Swiss economic tissue, would fall under the same legislation as multinationals headquartered in Switzerland. So that's an important point also to underline. Another open question is how the proposed law will be implemented by companies abroad, which are under the control of a Swiss-based firm, but not owned by a Swiss-based firm. And then equally controversial is the reversal of evidence. This is a principle whereby a firm that is accused of a rights violation has to prove that they have taken adequate steps to be exempted from liability. So this point, as you can imagine, might well end up at the center of future political debates in our country if the initiative passes at the ballot box, as it would be up to Parliament, as I mentioned, to work out detailed legislation to implement this initiative. So lastly, Christian and colleagues, what happens if the initiative is rejected? And so if the initiative is rejected, we will have an indirect counter proposal that will kick in automatically. And forgive me the technicality, but it's important to underline that this counter proposal would encompass various amendments in the civil and criminal law and is already adopted by Parliament itself. It lays out the obligation for the companies concerned to report annually on the human rights and environmental policies and to exercise due diligence, particularly in the areas, special due diligence, in the areas of child labor and conflict minerals. So in any European context, in the area of child labor, the counterproposal follows the concept of the Dutch law. The counterproposal does not impose any new explicit liability of the parent company for its subsidiaries or controlled parties. And important to underline also that in the event of a breach of the new obligations to account for the risks involved in doing business abroad, a fine of up to about 100,000 Swiss francs is provided, so about 90,000 euros, I think, by the current exchange. So independently from the result of the vote, a revision of the Swiss Environmental Protection Act will enter into force soon. I wanted you to be aware of that. And this revision was decided by Parliament last year and introduces also there a due diligence obligation for timber. And it gives the government the competence to introduce due diligence obligations for any other raw material if its cultivation, extraction, or production significantly affects the environment or endangers the sustainable use of natural resources. So long story short, as you can surely imagine after my legalistic remarks, the democratic debate is vigorous, it's healthy and necessary in line with Swiss tradition. It will no doubt continue to intensify. We have, opposing camps, regrouping various coalitions across civil society, across business, across political parties. But we have certainly a healthy democratic debate that is taking place in our country. At the time of speaking today, the polls indicate that in terms of a total number of votes, proponents of the Responsible Business Initiative hold a majority. We'll have to see what happens, how these polls evolve and how they turn into reality. Also with regard, of course, to the cantonal majority that I alluded to before. From Swissco's side, we'll be happy to debrief you on the outcome at the end of November and on the implications, of course, for the cocoa value chain actors in Switzerland, in particular, of course, around the area of child labor, but not only. I reiterate from our side on behalf of Swissco and all of our stakeholders that we are delighted to continue to work with our European partners to really look at increasing our leverage across the value chain, also on the particular topic of today of human rights due diligence, of course. And it is essential that we continue to share knowledge and experiences around best practice across our stakeholder group so that we accelerate really this transition to a viable and resilient cocoa value chain for both present, but of course also for future generations. So Christian, I think just in time, 10:30. I thank you for your attention and look forward to the remarks, of course, of EU Commissioner Reinders on the developments around human rights due diligence. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Filippo. Perfectly on time. And we will be able to discuss some of your thoughts and questions that some participants might have had about your presentation after Mr. Reinders' presentation. And now I would like to welcome our distinguished guest, former Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and European Affairs and Defense of Belgium, and now EU Commissioner for Justice, Didier Reinders. Mr. Reinders, we are now delighted to hear more from you concerning a possible human rights and environmental due diligence regulation on EU level and on the EU multi-stakeholder dialogue for sustainable cocoa. Thank you very much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for the invitation. So it's a pleasure to say some words about the actual situation and the proposal that we will put on the table at the beginning of next year. But maybe first I want to say that I've had the opportunity to work with some of you in my previous capacities. You said that about my role in Belgium as a foreign affairs minister and in other kind of department, but I was work with different kind of actors in the chocolate industry due to the role of Belgium and like other countries around the table in the way to work in the cocoa sector. And so again, let me thank the German, Swiss and Belgian platforms for sustainable cocoa for having invited me to the first joint event to speak about what the Commission plans to do in the field of company law and corporate governance to help us reach our sustainability objectives. And the debate today about how to tackle the environmental and climate emergency, as well as the respect of social and human rights in the supply chains, is taking place in a particular context amid the COVID-19 crisis. And of course, maybe later we will have the opportunity to organize some physical discussions with real conferences, but for the moment, due to the COVID-19 crisis, we are working more and more by video. And this pandemic, with its devastating economic and social consequence, has also further enlightened the need to reflect on the way in which we produce, how our companies are governed, and how their external impacts are addressed. It has also shed light on the importance of addressing adverse human rights impacts and social inequalities in the supply chains of European companies. A recent study by the Chicago University examines the child labor situation in Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, two producer countries with a majority of cocoa exports coming to Europe. The data on the prevalence of child labor in cocoa production indicates that in 2018 and 19, 45% of children living in agricultural households in cocoa growing areas and aged between 5 and 17 were engaged in child labor across Ivory Coast and Ghana. And 43% of children are engaged in hazardous work. The International Cocoa Initiative estimates that since the COVID outbreak, child labor has increased by 20%, which means an additional 300,000 children in those countries. Without legally binding measures, the complex problem of child labor is unlikely to be addressed successfully. The Commission intends to propose such a legally binding framework next year. With a Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative, we will aim at establishing a more stakeholder-oriented corporate governance. Such good governance is based on taking properly into account in corporate decisions the interest of workers, customers, the environment, and affected stakeholders impacted by the business. Such good corporate governance also includes proper identification and management of the company's risks and vulnerabilities, as well as compliance of appropriate due diligence requirements in the supply chain. The intention is to cover both directors' duties and a corporate due diligence duty. Firstly, the new rules will clarify directors' duties so that board members would have to consider wider stakeholder interest and the company's long-term interest as part of their duty of care. This is important to enable and require directors to balance stakeholders' interest with the short-term financial interest of shareholders, and to make the necessary long-term investment with a view to secure the resilience and sustainability of the company. Such investment encompass investment into new technologies, innovation, responsible supply chains, or workforce education. Directors would also be required to address properly all relevant sustainability risks and impacts of the company. Secondly, the new EU rules would also require companies to undertake social, human rights, and environmental due diligence in their own operations and value chains. These rules should ensure that internationally recognized human rights and labor standards are respected throughout global supply chains. So we'll start with some recognized standards at the international level with ILO for labor conditions, but also with other kinds of standards, also in relation with human rights and labor conditions. The initiative will build upon the United Nations guiding principles on business and human rights and the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises and its due diligence guidance for responsible business conduct. In the environmental field, we are exploring how to align the due diligence duty to international commitments and possibly other EU goals, such as the 2050 climate neutrality objective or the EU's biodiversity goals. These two together would in essence mean zero deforestation by 2050. These new duties should come with a proper enforcement regime, including civil liability and administrative supervision. Let me come to the question on how to achieve the necessary change. I believe that the scope should be broad and cover all companies with limited liability in all sectors. At the same time, we must carefully weigh the possible costs and benefits for small and medium-sized enterprises. As a company law horizontal measure, these initiatives underpins, complements, and enhances a number of Commission work streams. Such a legislative initiative would possibly address issues that are relevant for any company in any sector. It could be supplemented by thematic or sectoral initiatives and guidelines. For instance, this initiative would be complementary to the ongoing review of the non-financial reporting directive, over public reporting around the new board and corporate due diligence duties. Another example relates to existing and possible future mandatory due diligence in selected sectors or products sold in the European Union. Our aim is to ensure that the horizontal duty is a minimum which can be extended, if need be, by more demanding or more specific sectoral rules. The EU Sustainable Corporate Governance initiatives will also be complementary to the existing COCOA dialogue initiative, allowing bringing attention to the particular sustainability challenges of the COCOA sector and to the many other actions that are necessary to successfully address the complex problem of child labor in particular. There is also parallel work taking place on deforestation. The European Parliament is calling for limiting EU imports of forest risk products, and the Commission has announced a legislative proposal on deforestation for the Q4 2021. We hear the calls of many chocolate companies for abiding EU law on due diligence. We also notice that this has gathered support from other sectors as well. I count on your experience and constructive proposals to prepare our policy actions. The opportunity to express your views on the corporate governance initiatives is already open with our public consultation launched on 26th of October until 8th of February 2021. And of course, I want to insist on the fact that we are preparing an horizontal approach for all the companies with a limited liability and with a specific attention to the SMEs due to the specific situation of the SMEs. I want just to add that there are many discussions in member states about the same kind of possible regulation. There is a law in France, and there are some very important discussions in Germany or in the Netherlands, to give two examples, but also in other member states. And so the idea is to start with an horizontal approach. Of course, it will be possible for some member states to do more in some aspects of the regulation. It's also possible to do more in some sectoral discussions. And I said about the cocoa sector, it's already the case. And so the dialogue that you have organized for sustainable cocoa, it's an important part of the process. And the idea is to see how it's possible to give more and more information about the different kind of decisions taking at the level of the board with the director's duties and taking a due diligence process on the supply chains. Because of course it's very important to have a reporting on the actions taken by the different companies to be able to organize an accountability. And I spoke about the civil liability or the supervision by the authorities. Of course, without the reporting, it's quite difficult to organize that. And I want to conclude to say that, of course, I know that you have worked on this in the sectoral approach. And it's very important to explain that we try to ask to all the companies to do the best efforts about the full respect, full compliance with human rights standards, labor condition standards, and environmental goals that we have in our mind, certainly at the EU level. And of course, we will do that for the European companies, but we will try also to discuss about what is possible to do for the companies coming from abroad and working in Europe and taking advantage of the internal market, because it's very important to organize now a level playing field for all the companies at the EU level, but also for EU companies in comparison with companies coming from abroad. And in our consultation, we are very open to receive some proposals about how it's possible in general, but maybe also in one sector like your sector, to organize such a level playing field between European companies and other companies coming to the European market. So again, thanks for this opportunity to explain what we are trying to do and we will propose next year. I wish you, of course, a very good discussion today, and I look forward to future cooperation and collaboration on the topic. Again, if you have the opportunity to take part in the consultation that we have launched at the end of October, it will be fine, and it will be helping, it will give us the opportunity to take on board some remarks and some proposals in the preparation of our new regulation. Thanks a lot.
Commissioner Reinders, thank you very much. If we were sitting in a big auditorium, you would see many, many clapping hands to this presentation, but unfortunately now you need to just take my applause into account. We know that you have a very packed schedule, so thank you very much for being here with us today, but we will make sure that we take your comments into account in the further discussion, and I take your encouragement of all the members and all the organizations to contribute to your work and the stakeholder consultation. Mr. Reinders, thank you very much. Have a good day.
Please, you too, have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Yeah, now we have approximately 15 minutes to further discuss what has been said by Filippo and what has been said by the commissioner. And may I invite my three hosts, Filippo, Wolf, and Philippe, here. Please switch on your videos. And what I would like to ask you first, the three of you, so if you, from the standpoint of your initiatives, how do you see the initiatives that the European Commission is taking on the legislative front? Filippo, do you want to make a start?
You asked the non-EU member first.
Yeah, okay, that's correct. It may be easier for you as an outsider.
Listen, to answer very pragmatically, I think right now in Switzerland, the focus is on 29 November, as I have tried to lay out, the status in terms of, what's on the table, who's pro, who's against, what are the consequences. I think that's the first sort of focus within Switzerland, a vigorous debate that is also, and we're very much aware of what's happening in the EU, also taking place within the EU. I think the question about level playing field was alluded to by the Commissioner, is also something that is very hotly debated within the context of the initiative, and will also come into play with regard to the EU overall. What is the level playing field? How do you raise the floor? How do you raise the standards? How do you go beyond lowest common denominator? So I think at the level then ultimately of harmonization of an overall European view, it is certainly something that from Switzerland's side we will be following closely and following with interest, and injecting also our particular perspective of what will be the translation of this initiative on 29 November. So that would be the first part of my answer, Christian.
Wolf or Felipe, do you want to shed some light from your initiatives and how you assess what the European Commission is doing currently and thinking about?
Well, we had some discussions internally if we support a German approach for human rights due diligence, or if we even prefer a European-wide exercise. And on the basis we saw all the members of, or most of the members of GISCO support the European-wide approach. And Filippo said we need to have a level playing field in this extent, and thus will make a lot of things much clearer, and especially for the international companies who are members in our, but in other multi-stakeholders as well.
Okay, Felipe, are you here with us still? Okay, I don't know. Anyway, another thing that the Commissioner, at least to my ears, didn't mention was the EU multi-stakeholder dialogue for sustainable cocoa and thoughts about this. So to what extent will the European Commission, or is the European Commission thinking about such a EU multi-stakeholder dialogue? And what are your expectations? Because obviously we have the national dialogues. We have now the 3 dialogues coming together here. So what role should the EU-wide dialogue play, and what relationship should it have to the national ones? What are your thoughts about this?
So, sorry, I had a small problem with the internet. Can you repeat that, Christian?
There are ideas that there should be an EU multi-stakeholder dialogue on sustainable cocoa. So the question is, what relationship should this have to the national ones, or, for example, to the 3 of you?
Well, I mean, I think the reason that why we are here is very much because we're seeking leverage. No, we're seeking leverage in terms of the overall percentage weight that we have in the worldwide cocoa trade. By having leverage entails that you coordinate, that you align, that you lift each other up, and that goes with and through learning by sharing. That goes with and through dialogue, and with and through taking into account the particular context of a country. Switzerland, as you well know, is not a member of the EU, but follows very closely developments within the EU, and will continue to do so in a pragmatic way, all the while implementing and maintaining the right to implement via this direct democratic system that I outlined its own sort of legal structure and preferences. But in and of itself, I believe it is very much aligned with the trend lines towards better and more robust human rights due diligence, without the desire from a wide range of stakeholders in society to have more transparency and disclosure about company sustainability performance, not only in reports, but also at the level of embedding this governance and transparency process at the level of a board when it comes to a company, at the level of a government when it comes to its alignment to the Sustainable Development Goals, but also at the level of civil society in terms of advocating for more and better action in line with these overarching principles, and in this particular area, the UN guiding principles. So I think in that spirit, that's what I would answer spontaneously.
Thank you very much, Filippo. It seems that Philippe has technical problems, otherwise he's still here with us, but has a problem to enter the discussion. Now I see 2 hands that are raised. The one is by Dr. Opoku. Please, the word is yours. I will introduce you in a second, so please, for the podium discussion, but please join in the discussion now. Dr. Opoku?
Yes, good morning to everyone. and thank you very much for it. I just want to make a quick comment on the last the presenter by the European Commission for Justice. I just want to note that the presentation he referred to the report of which was released recently. I want to make a point that both Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire raised issues with the report, which went to an expert group that also came up with confirmation about the issues Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire faced. But having said that, had to compromise for the report to be released. The main point was that the study, the methodology they adopted was not proper to come up with some of the recommendations they came up with, bordering on a number of children that they estimated to be involved in cocoa in Ghana. It was so because those of us in Ghana, we know the effort, especially Cocoa Board and government, are doing regarding this matter. But that is not the subject of the discussion now. The only thing I want to say is that because of the issues.
Well, sorry, now we have a problem. Dr. Opoku, there was a technical problem. Sorry, I think that you need to repeat what you have said in the last 15 seconds. Mr. Opoku, the sound quality is very poor at the moment. Maybe you want to switch off the video functionality and only use audio. Dr. Opoku, unfortunately, we have some technical issues. So the audio quality was very poor, and now you do not even switch off your video. Can you still hear us? I fear that we need to take his point a little bit at a later stage. So it was a criticism about the methodology of the study that Commissioner Renders referred to. I take the second question. Evelyn Barn, could you please introduce yourself shortly and then make a very pointed comment, and then Filippo will be able to respond to it. Mrs. Barn.
Yes, thank you for this very interesting discussions and inputs we just had. My name is Evelyn Barn. I work for the Inkota Network, an NGO based in Berlin, and I'm the representative of civil society in the board of the German Initiative for Sustainable Cocoa. I put my question.
Mr. Opoku, let us now take Mrs. Barn, and then I will take your points again, okay?
All right.
Mrs. Barn.
I had my questions and my comments on Mr. Filippo Veglio input on the initiative in Switzerland already posted in the chat. What I would like to highlight is that as NGOs, we really see it highly problematic if the responsible business initiative is rejected and only the new due diligence obligations will focus on child labor and on conflict minerals. This would be a very selective approach on human rights. I would like to remind everybody that human rights are universal and should not only be valid for a certain group of people, or should not only be a certain human rights violation. And therefore, NGOs in Switzerland reject the counter proposal. I would also like to add to what Wolf, my board member from industry, that just said, that the majority of members at GISCO are asking.
Sorry, there's somebody not muted. We're trying to identify this person. Please check for yourself that you're muted. Sorry, Mrs. Barn.
Yeah, I would also like to comment on what Wolf just said, that the majority of GISCO members are asking for a regulation on European level. There are definitely quite a big group of especially industry and retail representatives that are asking for a European regulations, but also civil society are members of GISCO, and civil society is saying that we need a regulation on human rights due diligence on European level, but we see the need in Germany that we also have a national regulation. So the position on that is not quite clear within GISCO, and also like one of the ministries in GISCO, the BMZ, the Development Ministry, is currently working on a draft for key criteria for national legislation. So
okay.
Yes, so that's just my additional comments to what was just discussed.
Thank you very much. Filippo, how do we ensure that due diligence mechanisms do not become too complex and bureaucratic?
Hi, Ms. Ban, Evelyn, if I may say, nice to meet you. Thanks for your remark on the chat. And as you can see from the back and forth in the chat, there is differing views. I'm going to try to play the person in the middle as an independent president of the platform and give you a little bit of the perspective on your remark, Evelyn, about your concern. I would like to underline that the counter proposal does not forget about everything else that is out there in terms of human rights. As you know, it's human rights and environment. So we're looking at annual reports on human rights and environmental policies, and only basically exercise a special attention, then additional attention to the areas of child labor and conflict minerals. But the idea that you need to strengthen environmental and human rights provisions is very much there. It's very much also there in line with the UN guiding principles, which, as I mentioned before, we're looking back at 2016 already, including through the National Action Plan. So to put it very simply, at least in my mind, I try to keep things simple. It's not as if all of that goes out the door and we're looking then suddenly only at the area of child labor and conflict minerals. There will be a particular attention because of the nature of the areas of business around child labor and conflict minerals. But it is definitely not the case that we would forget everything else. I also want to underline again the point that independently from the result of the vote, there is an ongoing revision that will enter into force soon of the Swiss Environmental Protection Act. So again, I think we should, I understand that the various positions, and there are people who are way more qualified than me legally to comment on this, but overall the trend lines are clear. Overall the trend lines and the government's desire, the Swiss people's desire, the Swiss business community's desire to ensure compliance with human rights and environmental principles is there. It is about the how, and it is about, again, the level playing field and the discrimination perception around Swiss companies or companies based in Switzerland. That's an important point I wanted to make, and doing it in a way that is not overly sort of burdensome, in particular for smaller entities operating out of our country.
Thank you very much, Filippo. And now, Mr. Opoku, can we hear you now? Mr. Opoku? Unfortunately, Mr. Opoku? It doesn't work. Okay, so hopefully it will work once we enter in the panel discussion. Thank you very much to our three hosts and to Commissioner Reinders. I would now like to give the word to Sarah Bollermann. We discussed now a little bit the role of governments and the role of legislations and the initiatives that we see in Switzerland and on the European level. And we learned a little bit about how the attempts of EU legislation are perceived from the national perspectives, in particular Germany and Switzerland. But now we want to learn more about what companies are doing to implement human rights due diligence in cocoa. And Sarah Bollermann studied environmental science, and since 2008 she works for Aldi South Group. She is Director Corporate Responsibility of the Aldi South Group and responsible for corporate responsibility topics in food supply chains. Oxfam International put Aldi in its 2020 Behind the Barcode scorecard forward as the retailer that made best progress in terms of human rights practices. So, Ms. Bollermann, what is Saldithas Group doing to implement human rights due diligence in the cocoa supply chain?
Thank you, Mr. Torhun. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for the invitation to this event today, which for me, it's really a pleasure to be here to. So before I give you an overview or insight into our activities related to human rights due diligence, I would just like to give you a quick update about the Saldithas Group. So if you could switch to our first slide, the next one, please. Exactly. So we are obviously we are operating in 11 countries. We have 150,000 employees globally, and we focus on a small product range, an average of 1,600 products in our stores. The majority of those are our own brand products, and it's a majority of food products, but also non-food products we sell. As a discounter, actually, our aim and also our strength is to offer our customers with high quality and fair products at the best price. Our vision is actually we want to make sustainability affordable for our customers, at the end making sustainability mainstream. Our due diligence approach on human rights, if you could please click to the next slide. What we, as an international actually company with global supply chains, we are certain that our long-term business success can only be ensured if human rights are acknowledged, respected, protected, and fulfilled. Therefore, the element of to respect human rights is a key objective of our global CR strategy. We are obviously aware that this is really a huge task that cannot be solved alone. You're all aware human rights violations are a global problem affecting every economy, industry, and sector. So we know we need to collaborate with each other, with every single actor in and beyond the supply chain to actually start this process and this journey. And I really have to say our approach is just the beginning of a journey. To actually do our part, we follow a 6-step approach, which you can see on the slide. So it's about the declaration of principles as a first step, identification of adverse impacts, measures, and its evaluation, a grievance mechanism, reporting, and a continuous improvements. And my following slides will actually guide us a little bit through our process, and I will take cocoa as an example here. The obviously first pillar of our process, declaration of principles. If you start a journey like this, it is absolutely important to know where you want to go and what your target is. In doing so, we have launched several policies defining our commitments and approaches. And let me pick 2 of them. First of all, we have launched our human rights policy statement in 2018. And this is basically stating that we want to use our influence more effectively, where our negative impact on human rights is particularly severe. And in doing so, this need obviously to be reflected in our current internal processes, responsibilities, and structures. And this is obviously what this policy statement is all about. Another quite important aspect to prevent human rights abuses is legal regulation. We heard it before, we need a level playing field. Therefore, we are obviously supportive of a human rights due diligence legislation, ideally on a level that is as global as possible, as we are obviously dealing with global supply chains. And therefore, we really appreciate the current developments on European level and what Mr. Renders has just presented. We have also reflected this position actually in our position statement, which is visible on our website. The next step, obviously, is about identification of adverse impacts, which you can see on the next slide. If you could click on to that one, thank you. As I've mentioned, we have 1,600 products in our range. You can imagine if we really want to generate an impact with our CR commitments and programs, we have to focus. To do so, we have done a risk assessment on human rights in the food sector. And our goal obviously was to identify high priority supply chains. Before we started with this exercise, we had to look into our supply chains and identify the most important levels for us. You can see it on the top of this slide. And we obviously identified two spots. First of all, the raw material stage, as we understand that the biggest risk of severe human rights impacts lies here. And the second is also the final assembly stage, as this is obviously the stage where we as a retailer have the greatest influence. The risk assessment itself then focused on two elements. First of all, we wanted to understand where we have the biggest risk of human rights violations. And second, we also wanted to identify where does Aldi have the greatest level of influence in these supply chains, the biggest leverage at the end. Together with an external service provider who's obviously specialized in sustainability and human rights, we identified a couple of country risk indicators, both social and environmental. And to identify those, we actually used recognized external indices, which we then aggregated and weighted. And on this slide, actually, you can see the risks, the main risks we have identified. On the social side, we have obviously workers' rights, gender-based discrimination, child labor, forced labor. And on the environmental side, water scarcity, climate vulnerability, deforestation, and industrial pollution. Our risk assessment and the country risks that we have identified were then merged with our supply chain data. And based on this analysis, we have then identified our high priorities, which you can see on the next slide. So here, actually, you have the overview of all high priority supply chains we have identified on the raw material side and on the production facility level, where we have a high risk on the one hand, and on the other hand, also a high leverage of Aldi. And as you can see, obviously, cocoa is one of these priorities on the level of raw materials. But what are now concrete measures in order to work on the prevention and mitigation of these risks we have identified? If you would please click to the next slide. Here you can see actually our approach that we are using for all our high priority supply chains. We have identified 5 fields of actions that we understand are crucial to move forward here. On this slide, actually, I would like to give you a couple of examples from the cocoa supply chain to give you a little bit of a better insight of what these 5 fields of action mean. The first one, and actually the crucial part, a kind of precondition, is transparency. We need to know where our cocoa comes from to implement further activities. As you are all aware, this is quite challenging task at the end because the cocoa supply chain is a very complex one, specifically, obviously, for a retailer being at the very end of the supply chain. In addition, parameters like, or aspects like stock market, for instance, further decrease transparency. We are therefore working very closely with our business partners to better understand where our cocoa comes from. We did it, for instance, via questionnaires and also ongoing meetings and interviews with our core business partners. A second field of action that we have identified are standards. So requirements, standards, and certification systems actually play an important role here. And certification systems not only to implement CR criteria quite effectively, they also help us to increase traceability. Therefore, obviously, the use of those standards is a key element of our CR strategy. And our aim is to source 100% of certified cocoa by 2020 for the whole Aldi South Group. This obviously applies to all of our own brand products. And within Aldi, or branded products actually represent the majority of our product range, about 90% on an average. So you can imagine this is already creating quite an impact and a positive effect. However, we are also aware that we have gaps here. And this is why we are working very closely together with standard setting organizations together to aim for raising the bar at the end. For instance, we see the developments of Rainforest Alliance very, very positive with implementing sustainability differentials and sustainable investments in this standard. For us, this is really a very important element on our journey to rice farmers' incomes. The third part, obviously, is the integration of CR criteria into the buying process. Obviously, measures can only work if they are embedded into the core processes of a company. For us, this means that our commitments to responsibility needs to be reflected in our buying process. When obviously talking about our buying processes, it's important to understand that the majority of our products is not sourced directly from producers. Instead, we are working with suppliers who are commissioning the manufacture or import of the products. In the textile sector and for bananas, we have already established a CR supplier evaluation, which helps us to assess the sustainability performance of our suppliers. And we then award those suppliers that are very good in fulfilling our CR requirements. This obviously helps us to use our suppliers as multiplicators who are helping us to implement our standards and values in our supply chain. And this gives us the opportunity to hopefully achieve our sustainability goals at the end. We are now also developing and working on to scale up this approach to all high priority supply chains, also including cocoa. However, for cocoa, another aspect or another actor is really crucial to us, which are the global traders. So the majority of cocoa is obviously traded and processed by a small number of global traders, and they are much closer to the origin than we are, and they have a very good expertise on cocoa and sustainability issues. So for us, it's really key to collaborate with them and learning from them. As part of our membership in the retailer cocoa collaboration, we, for instance, also assess traders' performance together with other retailers. And in future, we are also aiming to use these results and feed it into the supplier evaluations we are developing. Obviously, the fourth part is a stakeholder dialogue, and I think I've mentioned it a lot before already. We really believe that the greatest impact in the cocoa sector can be achieved through collaboration. And for this reason, we are engaging in multi-stakeholder initiatives, aiming for an active dialogue with supply chain partners. Actually, our last pillar is capacity building and projects on the ground. In some areas, we are actually still missing a standardized approach. And here we are using projects on the ground to pilot new approaches that are ideally scalable. One project I would like to mention is the Cocoa Household Income Diversification Project. And we are really delighted and excited to be part of this project, which is obviously co-funded by Beyond Chocolate and implemented by Barry Callebaut. And the aim is obviously to supporting cocoa smallholders in Ghana. The two last steps actually of our human rights due diligence cycles. I would like to focus on a project we are currently conducting with Fairtrade. It's a monitoring project, and as part of the project, our business partner actually will source 100% traceable cocoa beans from the selected cooperative we are cooperating here with. And these will then be used in our exclusive brand product, Mosarot, parts of it. And the obviously goal of this project is to monitor this cooperative and to identify gaps in the cooperative itself, but also potentially in the standard itself. And based on these findings, we will actually define future targeted measures. One part we are looking into as part of this project is the child labor monitoring and remediation system. And the actually aim is that we would like to get an understanding and trial this system as a means for grievance mechanism and remediation. However, the reporting piece is really a crucial part of this project, and the first report is expected next year.
This bottom last minute, okay?
Sorry. Yeah. So obviously, reporting is also really a essential part of the human rights due diligence process, and obviously, on a broader scale, ALDI is externally reporting on the progress we have made on our website on a regular basis. Just to quickly sum up and to conclude on my last slide, as I have mentioned, this process is really a journey. And I would like to just share with you quite in brief some lessons learned and success factors that we have identified. First of all, prioritization is key to generate positive impact. Second, you can't manage what you don't measure. Hereby, data quality is important to ensure credibility of results. Third is obviously processes need to be embedded into the company's core processes. For us, this means we need buy-in from buying. Fourth is collaboration is key within and beyond the sector, and we should not duplicate efforts, but really build on every actor's strengths. And obviously, the last point, scalability to other products. For me, one of the key strengths actually of a retailer is to really scale up solutions, because we obviously have the access to all products and we really can see, okay, what does work, what not, and then use it for other supply chains. That's all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah. And sorry for interrupting, but I interrupted because there are so many questions and I want to make sure that these questions get an answer. So the first question was asked by Patrick Stoop, and he said, how to avoid that the human rights due diligence leads companies to shy away from regions where human rights are at risk, while actually it would be important to use the supply chain leverage to facilitate a transformation in favor for human rights. So what can there be, or what to do that the human rights due diligence process doesn't lead to the counterproductive effect that companies draw back from very worrisome countries?
Mm-hmm. I think when we are looking at a potential legislation, it is really important that this one can be implemented in a lean and efficient way. and that it is doable at the end for global companies and not creating too much admin efforts. And of course, also from an accountability point of view, we need to be careful here and define those in a way that can be realized by companies.
Oh, sorry. I think that the question was intended a little bit differently. It was let us assume that you have two countries from which you can source cocoa, and the one is really critical, and when it comes to human rights. So why should you, as an operator, then say, okay, then I go to country A, where the human rights situation isn't so bad?
I think this is really a very, very important and long-lasting part of our philosophy of our CR strategy, that we really putting our focus on stay in the market and trying to improve the situation there in order to really support or help to mitigate the issue at the end, because we are aware of the fact that if we kind of take away the buying power from a country, from a sourcing country, that this will even weaken the situation on the ground and have a contradictory effect at the end.
Okay, so withdrawing from a country is not really an option for Aldi. The second question was from Achita Faustmann, and she asked, was the Aldi risk assessment done in country-specific context or sector-specific context? Is the question clear? If not, we can ask Achita to explain it.
Thanks. No, I think it's clear. So actually, we did both. So we focused on the commodity groups that we are selling, so product types, but also linked it to where these products are produced and also where raw material is sourced from.
Perfect. Then a third question from Leonie Brühlmann. She asked, I see in the results, the high priorities, you did not list any packaging issues, for example, pulp and paper, which has an impact on deforestation, or aluminium, which has an impact on extraction. Why did packaging not make it to the top priorities due to the comparable lower volumes or spend? So why aren't these issues higher prioritized?
Actually, we have conducted this risk assessment in 2018 and really focused on the topic of human rights in food products, because this was a little bit a spot that we haven't that much investigated on in the past. And that was why we focused on that one. However, we have also prioritized as part of our strategy the topic of deforestation and also packaging reduction, for instance. This is an additional topic at the end, and we are currently also conducting a further risk assessment in the area of deforestation, which is then ideally embedded into our overarching picture.
Okay, then I have a question from Torben Erbrad. His question was, could you please clarify what the retailer cocoa collaboration is about?
It's actually a collaboration where between also retailers, and we actually conducted an assessment has actually conducted here to actually look into the activities of global cocoa traders. So this was the main part where we were currently engaged in.
Okay, thank you very much. And then there was a final question by Evelyn Bahn. How will Aldi, and it's about the relationship between Aldi and the standard setting organizations, and the question is, how will Aldi contribute to raise the bar of standard setting organizations such as Rainforest Alliance and Fair Trade that you mentioned, Will Aldi, for example, pay a higher sustainability differential than the minimum of $70 in the Rainforest Alliance system, or pay the fair trade living income reference price in the fair trade system?
Actually, we, I mean, as part of the, to raise the bar, obviously we were closely engaged with Rainforest Alliance and were part of the consultation process here. I think for us, it's really crucial that we have a system here and a tool to first understand the transparency, obviously, of our costs and the labor cost as they are. And then obviously the second step would be to identify a gap, and if a gap is realized, it's obviously yeah, at least the intention to try to work towards a better price here.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Maybe one final question from my side, because you responded to all the questions of the participants. One of the key questions that we want to address with this conference today is, what can we do to improve collaboration between all the different actors within the supply chain? What do you think? What would be the key thing that we need to change to improve collaboration between the actors within the next 1 or 2 years? What do you think would be a really great success in taking this issue forward?
I think I really appreciate the fact that we have this meeting here today, and that obviously we have a memorandum of understanding between all those European chocolate initiatives, like Gisco, Swissco, Beyond Chocolate, and also now the Dutch initiative. And ideally, obviously, this is further extended, and collaboration across Europe is further increased.
Thank you very much, Sarah Bollermann, for your presentation and for answering all these different questions. Yeah, a big welcome, and only from my side again, but maybe you will also see some hands going up from those who also activated their video. Thank you very much, Sarah Bollermann. We are now moving forward to our panel discussion. And before we start to do so, 2 remarks. The first remark is, if you want to participate after the lunch break in the breakout sessions, please make sure that you're logged into the system via internet, via the WebEx thing, and not dial in via telephone, because I think it's impossible to take you with a telephone into the breakout sessions. So use the time and try to log in via your computers. And the second remark is, you are now so kind to write questions in the chat. Now when we engage in the panel discussion, in the second part of the panel discussion, after we had the introductory remarks by our panelists, after we started a little bit of discussing on the podium, please also raise your hand so that we can see you and hear you, and then we will have a good conversation together. So that brings me to the panel discussion. So what do we want to do now? So we want to understand now better the different responsibilities of the various stakeholders and actors throughout the supply chain. And we want to ask ourselves how we can improve collaboration between these actors. So our panel discussion should provide good food for thought for our breakout sessions. And I would like to invite now, first of all, Anke Massad to switch on video. She is already present. She's a bioengineer specialized in crop protection and tropical agriculture. She worked in Africa, and since 2011, she works for Barry Callebaut as the sustainability country manager, ensuring the implementation of sustainability programs such as Cocoa Horizons. Barry Callebaut is one of the world's largest cocoa traders and one of the cocoa companies that called for human rights and environmental due diligence requirements in 2019. Anke, in a nutshell, what is the Barry Callebaut approach to human rights due diligence in a nutshell?
Hello, everyone. Is it possible to put up a slide? Yeah, thank you very much. Okay, in a nutshell, we don't have a lot of time. So basically, looking at the left of the slide, this is really the due diligence framework. I think you know the structure. This is really based on the OECD guidance. This is what it's all about, and this is what we want to achieve. And parts of that we already have, and other parts we are still lacking. But what it is about is responsible business conduct embedded into policies and management systems, and then communicate through the supply chain. And then the other steps are really about assessing and identifying the risk, prevent and mitigate the impact, remediate or cooperation in remediation, track implementation and results, and reporting. So that is really what it should look like, and this should cover our full area of operations. Now, just a few building blocks on the right side of the slide, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but of course it all starts with a policy. For us, that is our code of conduct. That is really our foundation. And on that, we've built all kinds of different policies and documentation that we use as a guidance. Overall, we have our Forever Chocolate commitments, which is really our time-bound commitment towards reducing child labor, deforestation, and then also to enhance living incomes of farmers. Very much similar to what you've already heard, it's really about a commodity and a country risk assessment that we do in there. And from there, we use our tool, our database, to actually track upon what is the baseline. These are KPIs, and how do we evolve from year on year on our journey towards our targets. Here on that part on Forever Chocolate, every year in December, we communicate on our KPIs. So basically, what is the progress that we were able to make? What are the challenges that we still have out there? What I also want to highlight here quickly is, of course, we have a lot of customers of ours who request for the voluntary certification or sustainability standards. So Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, our own program, Horizons. It is really also for us very important that we have that collaboration, so that we also know that these standards will also help us contribute to our overall joint mission. Besides having sites following SEDEX and having SMETA audits, those are things we were already having. We are really looking into how we can intensify it. And I think our biggest challenge will be our first mile. So where does the raw material comes from? Did we source it directly? Is it indirectly sourced? And how do we ensure that we can track this framework from A to Z throughout our supply chain? Our suppliers are hugely important. Supplier codes are there. Proactive collaborations with suppliers are there. And we're also still getting a lot of insights from that collaboration. And indeed, we did the joint, we underlined that the joint position paper with the Voice Network, with Mars Mondelez, with Fairtrade Rainforest Alliance. And we are very happy, of course, to hear that European policy and framework approach is really something that is now around the corner. We believe we really need that level playing field, and we need also that mandatory due diligence also for companies, so that we then actually can make our objectives realized within due time. So that's on my side in a nutshell what we are doing.
Thank you very much, Anke. And if you could, I don't know, name the 2 or 3 biggest challenges that you see in front of you as a trader organization in implementing human rights. So what do you think, what needs to be tackled to improve the situation for you as a trader?
There is due diligence for companies. It's going to be very important that there is really an enabling environment. So we see the role there for the EU and the producing governments to help us create that enabling environment. So we believe that is today the biggest challenge. One of the biggest challenges is to really get that enabling environment. Otherwise, the question was raised, there is of course the risk that actors will shy away from high risk areas. So that enabling environment, that bilateral agreement is hugely important. Another challenge that we see is the fact that part of the supply chains are based on direct sourcing, where you source directly from producer or producer groups. There are other parts of the supply chain where you source through other traders. So that's where, again, your sphere of control is different when you can source directly or when you source through other parties. So that's why it's important that we get that level playing field as well.
Thank you very much, Anke. I would now like to and hope that Dr. Emmanuel Opoku is on the line again. I haven't introduced him as of yet, but he already participated in the discussion. He's an economist and an expert in cocoa economy and management. For 28 years, he has been working in the cocoa sector in Ghana. He is currently the Deputy Chief Executive of Ghana Cocoa Board in charge of operations. The Ghana Cocoa Board was established by the Ghanaian government to facilitate the production, processing, and marketing of good quality cocoa. In October this year, the Cocoa Board started buying cocoa beans from cocoa farmers with the $400 living income differential added to their regular payments. So, first of all, Emmanuel, do you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, and I ask Emmanuel to switch off video to save bandwidth so that we can hear you properly. Sorry for the technical problem at the beginning, but hopefully now it will stay stable. So the question now for you is, what do you see as the key challenges when it comes to improving human rights in the cocoa sector, and what do you think is and should the responsibility be of the buying companies?
Well, thank you very much. I must apologize for the initial technical hitch. I'm not in Accra, I'm in the countryside, so the hotel, the internet wasn't well, so I had to drive out to a place where I can get better quality connection. So thank you. Yes, I would like to say that on behalf of Cocoa Board, we are grateful for this opportunity to at least inform the world what we are doing to improve human rights in the system. To start with, we actually use our Labor Act when it comes to managing our warehouse staff. So the Ghana Labor Act that regulates all workers' rights and everything within the sector. So that is applied correctly, and we are working with it. Now, concerning the cocoa sector itself, one key strategy or one key policy is to ensure or promote gender equality and within the sector. And so we do not discriminate against any women or men. We make sure that we give very important attention to women farmers, because we believe that in our cultural setting, the women take a very important role in the family setup. So that is one thing that underlines our policy to promote women farmers. And in connection with that, we even have a Women Farmers Award nationally. This year, that was just last Friday, the president awarded one of the women. I mean, every year we have an award for women, the best women, as well as youth farmer. We do that just to ensure to tell the world and Ghanaian everybody that look, any woman or man, you can achieve the highest in the cocoa sector. So that's one another point. And then, but the major challenge with the HRDD is at the farmer level. We have been doing a lot with partners. The government has been doing a lot to try to inform, educate the public, and to stop this practice of child labor in cocoa. The main challenge has to do with the cultural setting our communities live with, and one major factor is that in Ghana, has a certain responsibility towards your parents, and that responsibility also helps you to grow to become a very responsible adult. For example, in our communities, in the morning, if you see your mother, if you're a child of age 10, 12, going, and you see your mother going to fetch water, we don't have communities where you just open a tap in your home and then you fetch water. Usually, go to a public tap or a public, let's say, a borehole or a stream in the very remote communities to fetch water home. And these children, once your mother is going to fetch water, for example, you also go with a small receptacle that is commensurate with your body mass, and then so that process is part of the people's culture in Ghana. So whether we have cocoa or not, that's something that happens. Those of us who grew up in village communities, we all went through that. So, and it is a practice that is part of our culture. However, The problem is when certain families abuse that culture in our society. You may find a situation where maybe because there's no mother in there, so the children in the community have to take up that responsibility, because certainly the father won't do that. And in the process, you may find a child carrying something that is perhaps not commensurate with his body mass. That is one of the issues we have to deal with, because if you look at the definition,
Great.
it's child labor. Okay, so if we have situations where children have to fetch, for example, water to a farm for sprinkling to be done, the usual practice which they know is to do that before a day before the praying. A last situation where maybe the parents allow the children to fetch the water, and then when they go,
Okay.
So that is a challenge, okay, which we are educating them not to. Some know, others are not. So in recent past,
Emmanuel, first of all, we needed to start with a short input of everybody, and then let's discuss all these issues in greater detail in the panel discussion, okay? And I will make sure. Thank you very much. I will take sure that I refer back to the question of the cultural settings in our panel discussion. Thank you.
Right, thank you.
The next speaker, now we are switching to the producer side, is Daryl Hyde. Daryl works for Nestle and leads the Nestle Cocoa Plan. Since its launch in 2009, the Nestle Cocoa Plan has evolved, becoming more holistic to tackle major challenges. An important step was, for example, the addition of a child labor monitoring and remediation system in 2013, which now covers 78,000 farmers. Nestle, as you all know, is one of the largest food and drink brands in the world. It has committed to respecting human rights and the environment, both in its own operations and in its supply chain. Daryl, so how do you address human rights due diligence in your organization?
Yeah, what I've come with here is a real example of how to do human rights due diligence in the cocoa supply chain. So the system, our what we call CLMRS, it sits in our supply chain. So we have all the actors of the supply chain involved in this. And this goes from the farmer and their household, to the co-op, to our supplier, Nestle, of course, and the NGO ICI that helps us put this system together, and as well as local government departments where relevant. So it starts in the middle there. What we're using is local people in each of the communities we work with to check up on the situation of the kids in our community and to do awareness raising in the community as a whole. Now, these people are chosen by the community and they're employed by the farmer cooperative. So it's an example of how the partners in our supply chain are really part of this. The community liaison people, they do field visits and they talk and interview the parents and the children. And when they find a child doing hazardous activity, doing child labor in some way, they then follow up with the family, discuss the situation, and they enter this into a database. The whole thing is linked together with an online database put together by ICI. So they discuss the situation with the family, and then we move on to the remediation or the helping bit. And that's where the community liaison person discusses with the co-op, and the co-op discusses with the supplier, with Nestle and the NGO ICI on what to do in terms of remediation. And here we could be helping the family itself. We could be helping the child, for instance, get into school. We could be helping the family with an extra income generating activity. We could be helping with putting together a work group, for instance, to help do the hazardous activities on the community's farms rather than the children having to do it. Or we could be doing something at the community level, such as, for instance, building a school. And because we're following up on the children and we're putting all this into a database, there's a measurement element, so we can see how well we're doing and how many kids are coming out of child labour and how many are rather more difficult cases. And as you can see, about half the kids are coming out of child labour with this system. So it's an example of how all the actors are coming together, and this is put together with the help of the co-op. The co-op is employing these community liaison people. We're funding that, but they're actually employing them. The suppliers helping it all come together, and the NGO ICI is helping the system work and managing, making sure the people are doing their roles. And as you can see, I mean, this isn't just a pilot project, it is done at scale. With around 87 co-ops involved, over 70,000 farmers and over 1,600 community liaison people working in each community. And we've reported publicly on this system twice now, in 2017 and 2019. 2019, for instance, we said we'd found over 18,000 children in a situation of child labour, children working for their parents but doing hazardous tasks.
Thank you very much, Daryl. And just to understand it correctly, Anke made the differentiation between the direct sourcing and indirect. This obviously relates to where you know from whom you're sourcing, so the direct sourcing, correctly?
Yes, and our intention is to roll out our direct sourcing is the Nestlé cocoa plan, so to roll out the Nestlé cocoa plan to all the cocoa in our confectionery supply chain by 2025.
Thank you very much. And then I would like to welcome Vidya Arangan. She's a developing researcher by training. Before joining ICIL in 2015, she worked with the Fair Trade System based out of London. ICIL, as you will know, is the global membership organization for sustainability standards. ICIL's mission is to strengthen sustainability standard system for the benefit of people and the environment. And here Vidya leads the ICIL's impact and evidence team to better understand the impacts of sustainability standards and addresses the question of how to improve them. Vidya, so what can we learn about the effectiveness of sustainability standards and how can we improve them in the field of human rights protection?
Thank you, Christian, and thank you to all the other speakers who've come in so far for the engaging discussion. As a community of sustainability standards, ICIL and many of its member organizations, such as Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, and so on, have, at an overarching level, been making 2 points with regard to the intersection of VSS and human rights due diligence. And these are the 2 points. The first is that voluntary credible sustainability standards welcome any type of regulation or legislative action that actually makes companies look more closely at their supply chains and actually assess the risks in their supply chains that relate to human rights violations or environmental damages. And the second point that these groups of standards have been making is that in the context of possibly emergent human rights due diligence, voluntary sustainability standards should be, and I think as Sarah's case study points out, are already acting as a complement to such human rights due diligence and regulatory measures. Standards do not seek to preempt and definitely do not seek to replace any such legislative action. When it comes to the role, therefore, that credible sustainability standards can play in supporting company action in abiding by these due diligence requirements, I'd highlight probably 3 points at an overarching level. Credible sustainability standards should and can be part of the company due diligence toolkit. They provide additional assurance for certified products based on the content and scope of the standard. And here I would like to stress the content and scope of the standard is important. Previous speakers have mentioned how there is a need for human rights due diligence to cut across the supply chain. And many sustainability standards are quite focused in that they focus on the production side. So for that part of the supply chain where standards cover with their content and criteria, they can provide additional traceability benefits, they can provide additional assurance benefits, and they can provide a lot of data and insight benefits to companies as well. I think the second area where sustainability standards can prove to be a real partner for companies is in terms of having set up processes and systems that provide a sort of mechanism for assessment, detection, remediation, capacity building, and continuous improvement. I think the speakers until now have really highlighted each of these elements in action in their very specific case studies. But standards, by virtue of the fact that they've been operational for about 2 decades plus, really have these systems and these relationships in place. So I think when it comes to companies and enabling them to actually make sense of these due diligence requirements, what are the step-by-step approaches, standard systems can prove to be really good partners in that process. However, and this is a point I really want to stress, standards are not intended and cannot replace company obligations. The fact that a company actually sources, and sort of puts on shelf certified cocoa products does not take away from the fact that it can do much better to understand human rights if it looks at its entire supply chain, and which is what these legislations will sort of help do. And the last point I want to stress, as is already highlighted on the screen, is that there is a real risk, I think, in this entire debate that with human rights due diligence coming into place, addressing human rights could become a tick box exercise. The focus from a company standpoint is always on risk. Do I face X, Y, or Z risk in my supply chain? And how do I go about managing that? But I think the evidence is now mounting that if you really want to address human rights issues, a more holistic approach to understanding sustainable development and livelihood opportunities holistically is needed. There is a lot of evidence that when communities, farming communities, have a better sort of variety of livelihood options, that key criteria, not just related to child labor or child attendance in school, but criteria such as other human rights violations or even incentives to reduce deforestation, all start to fall into place. So as standard systems, and I think the speakers at the start of the session alluded to this, as standard systems, standards that take on a commitment to living income and living wage really put on the table an approach to sustainable development and sustainable agrarian development that sees human rights as a part of the sort of wider puzzle, so that you can address the root structural causes that lead to situations where such abuses occur.
Thank you very much, Vidya. And when it comes to sustainability standards, in 2 words or 2 sentences, what would you say? Where do standards need to improve? You said much about the role of standards and the limitations of standards, but what do you think? What is the way ahead with standards?
So I think the first area where standards need to improve, and this is a space where standards themselves are taking the leadership, is really to improve the applicability and innovation around assurance mechanisms. So if the assurance mechanisms is clearly one of the benefits that working with a sustainability standard offers a company, then it's quite important that that mechanism, that process can be as robust as it can be. There is no situation in any context where an individual audit can give you a 100% guarantee of picking up any risk. But what an assurance process does is that it gives you a process to assess risk, sort of verify against that risk, set up remediation processes, set up grievance redressal processes, and so on. So I think the first space where standards are improving is really looking more closely at the whole range of assurance tools that are available, and what level of tool and what level of robustness needs to be applied to very challenging sort of contexts like this. I think the second area where standards can really do better is in becoming a partner to companies when it comes to data and insight. Sarah's presentation earlier today alluded to the fact that as a company, if you're starting on this journey or sort of already on this journey of trying to understand the human rights risks in your supply chain, there is going to be a need for data and insight on what's happening within your supply chains at various stages. And sustainability standards, by virtue of the fact that they do collect a lot of data and analyze a lot of data, can become really good data managers and partners to company in that process, which means that for that part of the supply chain where the sustainability standard is applicable, standards can really be a source of a lot of insight for companies. So I think these are areas where standards are aware that more can be done and are really innovating.
Thank you very much, Vidya. Now we are changing and shifting to the retail side. And I would like to welcome Mieke Verkaren. She is a commercial engineer, international trade, and has been working for many years on sustainability issues. 10 years ago, she joined Colruyt Group to work on sustainability, public affairs, and innovative international projects. Colruyt Group is a family-owned retail corporation that manages one of the biggest retail stores of Belgium. Colruyt has the ambition of being a reference point and source of inspiration for sustainable entrepreneurship in Belgium. So, Mieke, how is Colruyt implementing human rights due diligence today?
Hey, hello everyone. So I will just give a quick overview and start with the value chain, because in many discussions today we talk about value chains, and this is a very simplified one. But I added here on the slide because Colruyt Group decided some years ago to take the value chain as a whole field to work on in sustainability. So this was an ambition. And what we want to do as a step further is to enable and stimulate consumers become a more conscious, to get a more conscious consumption pattern. So there is a value chain, there is a consumer. I didn't hear too much here today about consumers, but in the end, it's our ambition to really stimulate sustainable consumption. Okay, you can click for the next point. Malus, yes. So what do we do? A bit more maybe related to cocoa. So we joined Beyond Chocolate. I'm also a member of the steering committee of Beyond Chocolate for the retail. I didn't hear much about today about Amphori. So as Colruyt Group in 2002, we already saw, especially in the non-food, that there were big issues with the child labor. So then we decided to set up a structural approach to ask all our suppliers to sign and have like an engagement for having no child labor in their value chain, and also to accept audits, social audits as we call it. And now later on in 2017, we joined Amphori. So this has only been growing. So we have around 430, 500 audits a year. In the case that there is not a certification scheme that takes into account some aspects related to human rights, but as we call it so far was on social topics in the value chain. Yes, you can go to the next point. Yeah. So I really want to make a difference between generic approach that we take with Amphori, for instance, and what we do on top of that. So 15 years ago, we started our first chain project, and that is more like a multi-stakeholder collaboration between NGO, trader, retailer, all actors in the value chain to develop best-in-class sustainable projects. And there, of course, the context of the product, of the culture, of the abilities, the cooperatives comes very clearly in the game. And we have an ambition for Colruyt Group to go further to develop this kind of chain projects and bring these products specifically branded also in the stores. What we do on top of that is to invest in education. So as Colruyt Group is a strong believer in empowerment, and we invest in the education of youngsters to empower them in those countries to really make the difference and to become stronger and take really their future into their own hands. The chain projects are all in different difficult countries. I mean, it's in Burundi, it's in Kivu, it's in Colombia, it's in Benin, it's in countries where the situation is difficult to operate. That's why a chain project takes time, and we have successes, but sometimes it doesn't come to a result as well. The certification, I think in general for retailers, certification is one of the toolings we have. We do not have too many things because we do not have active activities in those countries. We do not have logistic facilities there in general. So for the more smaller retailers, we really rely on certifications, and we hope that they also will take up the challenge of human rights and social topics. Okay. Then my last point is related to the communication. So within Colruyt Group, so far, we look at the materiality of a product group and the sustainability topics behind it. So this means we work on healthy things, on health of products, we work on societal aspects in the value chain, animal welfare, and environmental topics. The thing that we have more downstream the value chain is that we can communicate. So we can try to connect with consumer, try to explain what the topics are in the value chain, and also make them enthusiastic about the change we all have to realize together in the value chain to come up with a better local context situation for people working in the value chain.
Thank you very much also for Mika. Now we have 30 minutes left to discuss these issues further. And I would say that we should focus on the following issues. The first issue would be, so what is the responsibility of the different actors, in particular, if you do not do direct sourcing? So if you do not know from whom you are sourcing, and to what extent can you rely on standards in these cases? Second question would be on the cultural setting that Emmanuel was referring to, and what to do about them. And thirdly, it's the question about the role of sustainability standards. And within all this, we should discuss also how cooperation between the different actors can be supported. And just to my panelist, a plea, let us try to be as short as possible, because there's so many questions out there, and we can only take as many questions as we allow participants to also ask their questions. So let us start with the first question. So it is always a difficult, tricky issue to take responsibility if you do not know from whom you are sourcing. So what is your response to this challenge that many SMEs, and particularly if you are, or for example, if you're a retailer, you might not know from whom these products or the raw materials were sourced. So what should we be doing? So what responsibility can a retailer in this, a small, medium enterprise retailer, fully rely on a standard and certification? Please raise your hand, whoever wants to. Vidya, do you think that the responsibility is fulfilled if I then rely on certification?
Thanks, Christian. I'm happy to kick off with some thoughts, but would love to hear what the other panelists have to say as well. I think, as I said in my opening remarks, sustainability standards can be partners, but they can never substitute the efforts that a company puts in on its own to look at its entire supply chain. Let me give you an example. I think Sarah put it out quite nicely in her slides, where she said the first thing that Aldi South actually had to do was basically not just ask themselves where they want to get to, but assess basically what sort of risks they looked at in their own supply chain. That degree of effort and transparency a sustainability standard cannot give a company, because the sustainability standard operates at certain levels, and a lot of the focus of many standards currently is on the production side. I think what multi-stakeholder sustainability standards can do is actually help retailers or other businesses which are looking for more traceability, provide them tools and provide them with partners who can actually help make that data available. The traceability aspects that sustainability standards do bring are applicable for sort of direct supply chain, but I think because these standards are set up in a multi-stakeholder manner, and they generally reach out to a large number of stakeholders in the cocoa sector, these standards can prove to be partners for other aspects of the supply chain as well. So I just stress that standards cannot give full traceability for entire supply chains of a retailer, but I think for aspects and for parts of the supply chain where they do work, I think that traceability is one of the benefits that standards can give.
Anke, what would you say? What is your approach to taking responsibility when you do not know from whom your sources and other traders, where they source from? You don't have a direct impact, direct knowledge.
Yeah, so it's clear. So the sphere of influence, if we do direct sourcing, is of course totally different than if we buy beans through another trader, for example. I think what is the most important, it's been highlighted already, is that there must be kind of an enabling environment in the origin countries that we actually get traceability, national traceability systems, for example, in place where companies play a big role, and a lot of traders and processors are working on traceability systems to get that first mile traceability set up. It's taking time, but there is a lot of progress that is happening there. I think it's just important that for whomever we buy beans from in our indirect supply chain needs to play by the same rules and needs to have the same obligations and needs to be able to benefit from that same enabling environment than what we do in our direct supply chain. And that is something that, of course, it's the closer you are to the farmers, the more responsibility you have there. And I believe it's just important that whatever we can set up in our direct supply chain must be able to be set up in our indirect supply chain as well. but there is a responsibility of our suppliers in that sense. I think that's where it's the level playing field is enormously important, and the enabling environment to just set it up. Today, for example, we see under the standards, we see origin matching coming up. So for example, where you're able to say from which origin you have bought the beans, the certified beans. There are regions where today it's very difficult to get the certified beans from. So that's precisely that enabling environment that we're talking about. There are quite some steps that need to be taken for us to be able to ensure that both the direct and the indirect supply chains are tracked.
Any other of my panelists wanted to contribute to this discussion of responsibility when you do not have a direct relationship to the farmers, and what your responsibility then is?
Well, I think one of the first things they should do is transform the supply chain that they have. So to make it more traceable, so they know where their cocoa is coming from. And on the area of the role certification can play, well, at the moment, it's not good enough to fulfill human rights due diligence, but I think in future they should strive to that. The worry I have is if every single company does its human rights due diligence in its own way, then we could have a very inefficient situation. And certification could be a very useful way to standardize the way HRDD is done in the supply chain. And I think making things efficient is beneficial for farmers and beneficial for the kids. So it would be a good thing.
Emmanuel.
Thank you very much. I just want to assure all the buyers, the chocolate makers, that for Ghana, our estimation is starting October 2021, to be able to trace cocoa to the community it was sourced from. Every cocoa bag that comes. When our cocoa management system we are putting in place, every cocoa bag can be traced to the producer. Maybe the buying companies at that level will make it even more possible that from that point on, all our production will be traced to the community and the farmer, because the cocoa management system is a very transparent process that will identify which farmer is farming in protected forest, or which farmer is using children to produce cocoa. So that is the system we are putting in place right now. It is for this same system that I'm here in one of the the communities in the countryside, trying to take my regional managers at a work to how it's going to work.
Mika, just adding to, I think you wanted to say something about the question, what responsibility does one take if one do not have a direct relationship? I think Evelyn's point relates to this, and she asked, maybe we should discuss who will carry the cost to fulfill human rights due diligence. For example, traceable supply chains that cost a lot of money. So as long as we do not talk about cost and make them transparent, we will not have an honest discussion about responsibilities along the supply chain. Should traders pay for it, the chocolate producer or the retailers? How can costs be shared? How much does such a system cost for Ghana, and so on and so forth? So do we need to talk about costs? And if so, who needs to carry these costs?
Well, I think that
sorry, that was directed to Mika. Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. I think indeed costs are important, and what the challenge is, I guess, is to see what kind of measures or actions have impact in the different steps in the value chain, and then look related to the actor who is responsible in the value chain. What is a good way of looking at the costs? For the moment, for instance, Colruyt pays audit costs, and we pay good prices, or we do other things. But the question, what I see happening a bit, that because of everyone wants to go to an improvement, different actors in the value chain invest, so it's money, or have costs. And the question is, how can we make this also more cost efficient, that we have in the end, we might spare some money in topics like having all investments in making it more transparent and having it more clear in the value chain, but maybe we should take this money and invest in the region itself. And this is, I think, a bit the challenge we have to take together with certification bodies, with the organizations who invest in training of the cocoa farmers, with the government who also co-invests. How can we come with a common investment plan that really can have a good impact? So this needs also kind of harmonization, I guess.
And for this harmonization,
everyone will have to pay. That's clear. So everyone will have to pay, and pay is already part. But the question is it aligned and is it efficient?
And for this alignment, do you see a particular role for example, these multi-stakeholder initiatives, or is it by the regulators, or who should take the initiative to work on this alignment?
What I see happening now, which is a very good evolution, that in the different member states, Switzerland, okay, we all come together and come with consortia. We think we can have impact, but of course, this is only still one part of the whole topic. We also need more NGOs. Maybe we also need the government, especially local governments, I guess, to connect together, because also they are putting money, are investing, are asking money to business, and we have to see how can this get also more transparent and that we all see together where we are heading for.
Thank you very much. I would like to now move on to, and when it comes to the question of aligning forces, then the question is, what is our key objective? And the key objective obviously is human rights, and for example, or in particular, making sure that there's no child labor. And Emmanuel, your points about the cultural factors, that stirred quite a number of comments. I would like to ask Anthony, Anthony, to make his point. Anthony, introduce yourself and make your point on the question of cultural factors and child labor. You're muted. Anthony, you're muted. Okay.
Is this better?
Yes, that's better.
Okay, good. Sorry, there's something wrong. This is better. Hi, my name's Anthony Fountain. I work for the Voice Network. We're an umbrella organization for NGOs and trade unions working in the cocoa sector. I think there's two main points I want to make. One around child labor. I think it's very important to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about child labor. And the most recent research around child labor in the cocoa sector shows that we're not specifically dealing with just children helping out quite harmlessly after school. 40% of the children that have been interviewed around child labor in the cocoa sector have been seriously ill. There's been children having to go to the doctor. There's been massive increases of children using pesticides, back pains, joint pains, all those issues. So I think that it's, just saying, oh, these are just children helping out after school. The data that we're looking at simply does not support such an assertion. 3/4 of the children in Côte d'Ivoire are doing more than one dangerous kind of child labor, and 2/3 of the children in Ghana are doing more than one dangerous forms of child labor. So if we do want to reduce child labor and at the same time allow kids to help out after school at the farm, I mean, I grew up on a farm. I helped out after school. That was not child labor. That's not what we talk about when we talk about child labor. If we want children to be able to help out at times when it's in a way that's safe for them, outside of school, etc., then what we really need to focus on is to help families to cease having their children doing harmful things. I think that really should be the key focus in that, not to cause questions around definitions. I really think that we need to keep the main thing, and that is to make sure we help the children to stop doing dangerous work. That's the first point. The second point I'd like to make, clearly this panel is a very important one, reflecting a lot of the industry's perspectives around these things. I think that, and it's good to see Vidya there on behalf of the standards. I think, though, there are other perspectives to this as well. And the important thing, I think, that from a civil society perspective, if you listen to this conversation, it sounds as if we're already quite far down the path of implementing due diligence in our individual corporate activities and in our individual supply chains. And I think that any real implementation of a due diligence regulation that would make real change would also require all of the speakers in this call, their companies, to significantly change their practices as well. I think several of the companies in this call have been working together with us, calling for a regulation, and much appreciation for that. At the same time, this will require everyone to change, and to change quite significantly. I think that that's a very important part, that it's not just about aligning. We're really going to have to change things in how we're doing things. So those are two things. Child labor, yes, we need to work on that, not just on the definitions. And also, we're nowhere near implementing it yet.
And I would like to take Friedel Adams' point and then give Manuel the word again. Friedel, I think you made also some points on child labor, what to do about it.
Yes, Nestle said that they reduced child labor by 49%.
You need to speak closer to the microphone.
Nestle said that they reduced child labor by 49%, which is already much higher than what most of the other companies succeeded in. But the question is, why do children work on farms? And often it's an economic question. In most cases, to say we need more schools might be true for some regions in Côte d'Ivoire, but not in most regions of Ghana, for example. So we need to discuss income of farmers. We need to discuss the role of cocoa prices for the income of farmers. And I would like to hear what Mr. Opoko thinks about that, because the Guinean government introduced the LID, special premium on every cocoa to increase farm gate price. Is this a process which could continue?
Emmanuel, so yeah, responses to your point about cultural factors. The one was, it's not that children are simply helping out, but that they are doing dangerous forms of child labor with hazardous substances, for example. And the other thing is, don't we need to raise income levels? Emmanuel.
Yes, I think in your initial comments, you indicated that the government implemented the LID, which was signed with industry quite recently. That's one part of it. But the key issue is what can we do as a regulator to end the issue of child labor? In the past, we have been collaborating with our partners, and while the study that came up recently suggests that effort hasn't done much. There are some that will bring greater transparency in the system. First of all, Ghana, as a policy, we engage adults to spray cocoa and pay them. So the sprayers of cocoa in Ghana are on cocoa board payroll. We engage around 50,000 adults to do. So that is the policy of Ghana. And if we find any child or spraying cocoa or working on cocoa with pesticide, then that child must be doing that illegally. So. What can we do to stop this? Now we have initiated our cocoa. This is a system that is going to register every cocoa farmer in Ghana and every parcel of land that is cultivated cocoa. So at the end of the day, we are registering farmers and their household members, including their old children. And then after the registration, we go to their farm fields, use GPS to measure their farmlands, and link that information together. Two objectives. One, we want to be able to track the progress of children in the community. So when that system is complete, anybody can come in here and conduct any study we will respect data protection rights and all that. But then it gives us the opportunity to give out information to researchers who want to go into the field to study the progress, how child labor is whether it's doing better or no. But then for us, we will follow the progress of these children and be able to give accurate report to the ministry on remediation measures. So it is a system that will be very comprehensive and introduce greater transparency and cocoa and traceability in the cocoa supply chain in Ghana. Now, the other thing is on environmental sustainability. when we are able to measure all farms with a GPS location, then that gives us a better view of where every farmer is producing cocoa from. So farmers that are producing cocoa from protected forest, then it gives us an easier way to take them out. There is already a program in place supported by the World Bank to resettle farmers who have encroached and operating illegally in protected forest. So that cocoa management system is a very comprehensive system that is going to show us where every farm is producing cocoa, and where every child lives in the farming community, and then we can follow up on any suspected case of child labor, because then we have all farmers in there. We can go directly and work out. This is the kind of due diligence system we have initiated, and we believe that within a period of 12 months, we should be able to have the system working. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. I think that you made the important point that at the end it comes down to how can we improve the situation on the ground in the producing countries. And Mika made the point that we need to align our resources, and not everybody does something, but that we align our resources. And I think Torben Erbrad's comment pointed in a similar direction. Torben Erbrad.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hello, Mr. Terun. Hello, everybody. I think it was very important what Anke Massad said, that that we have to enable the environment for traceability and for the companies in the producing countries, because if you think about the approach of the UN guiding principles, it comes to the fact that we have to think about the people at the first stage of the supply chain first. And I do not agree with Anke on that point that we have different responsibilities. From the concept of the UN guiding principles, everybody in the supply chain or every company has the same responsibility, because the same responsibility means for the first person at the supply chain. It differs what measures you have to take. And there, from my point of view, it's very important that the standards have to rethink their role, because they do not have to assess what's in the company, the risk. But if it comes especially to small and medium-sized companies, what could be the tools they can use to reach the persons at the first stage of the supply chain? And I think it's a little bit too short. We talk about all the other things that we have to solve, child labor and so on, which is the general discussion. Today we talk about the human rights due diligence and how could companies fulfill possible legal legislation requirements. And I think we have to focus more on that. And there, for me, it's very important, how can we reach the persons at the first stage of the supply chain?
And if you, we're coming closer to Christmas, if you would have the one wish for the standards and how they should change and evolve, what would this be in concrete terms? Give us an example.
Well, this would be that they have more concrete requirements and that they are more implemented in the company programs.
Okay. Mika, I think you wanted to say something, and I assume the video wants to say something about it.
Yes, what is important for me is that maybe the certification schemes become smart and digital, and that they measure quantitatively, and also what we've heard just that we need data platforms. We need to link products with people, with companies. So we need like a common data platform, I guess, and that would really be very helpful to facilitate all the actors in the value chain to see what happens. Of course, taking into account the privacy matters. So this is something I put aside for a moment. But in general, when value chains are complex and the challenge is big, I think connected data platforms can work to be sure that what we invest leads really to results. So technology and data gathering and analytics seems very can be a promise, yeah, for the future.
Vidya, what do you make of the point by Torben Ebrard that standards have to change to really ensure that they facilitate much more companies in fulfilling their obligations?
Yeah, there's many interesting points that I want to respond to, but I'll try and keep it brief. So the point specifically about standards need to rethink their role as being partners on human rights due diligence. I mean, standards have multiple goals. They were not originally set up to be tools only to assist with human rights due diligence. So clearly this is a dynamic space. And I think of the many goals and objectives that standards can fulfill, there is now, and many speakers have alluded to this, there is now the feeling that they can do better with what they already have so that they can support companies with human right due diligence. Mika has made the point about data, and I mentioned this. This is a very prolific area where standards are working to actually become data managers. So the question is not, do standards need to rethink? They're already assessing how they can be better partners for companies. But a standard system on the whole cannot only, be a tool to achieve human rights due diligence, because they're also tools to achieve sustainable, agricultural outcomes at local levels. They have capacity building and continuous improvement goals as well. So I think the question is, how can they do with what they have and improve on that front to be better partners to support companies to comply with human rights due diligence? I want to specifically address the point that the route to actually standards improving lies with standards criteria, stronger principles and criteria. So this can be a double-edged sword. I mean, at the end of the day, we need to recognize that sustainability standards are voluntary instruments. Standards, principles, and criteria are already sort of quite robust and stringent for many of the most vulnerable and marginalized agrarian companies. You look at the evidence and it'll tell you that the producers who work with or are part of sustainability standard schemes are already not the most underprivileged or not the most marginalized or not the most, who come from most challenging situations. So if standard stringency is only going to go up, you're just going to see producers not be able to comply with them. And that's not going to really solve the problem of child labor in these production countries or help companies, comply with human rights due diligence. I think the whole point about how can you actually develop human rights due diligence in an empowering way, so that it's not felt that the primary burden of compliance falls on the producers. I think that's a very important point for the Commission, for the COCO platforms to also sort of take on point, because there is the real risk that the more burdensome it becomes, the more producers you're going to have who just sort of drop out of the system, rather than taking communities along to actually address the issue. And lastly, I want to address the point about data insights, common data platforms, and common indicators. I think Daryl pointed to this. Standards are very much part, they're very active at the table when it comes to questions of common indicators. Some of the initiatives in the space have actually been led by sustainability standards. So I think this whole arena of common indicators, consolidation of frameworks that companies can follow in the COCO space, standards taking the lead in sharing data, given sort of data confidentiality rules, etc., and leading the way to provide insight really holds a lot of promise. But again, this will not allow any given company to cover 100% of its supply chain, which is what a human rights due diligence law would require them to do. So there will always be the need for a company to also do its own risk assessment and identify risks that possibly lie outside the scope of the supply chain that are covered by standards.
I would like to, because we are now coming to an end, I would like to take one more comment. And the comment was, how can the ISCOs join forces and move beyond words? What can all the members of the ISCOs together achieve? Any ideas? Because, yeah, there we are already together. What are our expectations? Any thoughts about this, Mika and Daryl? Mika.
Yes, my hope is by the better collaboration between the platforms as we have them now, which are quite strong, that finally we will get a realistic view on where we are today and what the real effort is. This would really, for me, be a very, very good outcome, to have realistic data on where we are, because then we really can start working. Yeah.
Thank you. Daryl.
Yeah, I think the factor of the ISCOs coming together is already great. Certainly favour a standardisation in Europe and a sharing of best practice. So let's come together, work out what are the best things to do, and then actually do it in our supply chain. And with the ISCOs coming together, I think that's a great start.
Thank you very much. We're now coming to our closing comments, and everybody of you have 20 seconds. And the thing is, After lunch, we will have the breakout sessions. And in the breakout sessions, we will focus on many of the issues that we have discussed now with you on the panel. Which role can standard organizations play? What can retailers do? What can traders do? How do we ensure that civil society organizations in the producing countries play their role? So what are the thoughts that you would like to give into these groups or into one of those groups where you think should the focus be on? And just be selective. You cannot cover everything, so be selective. What do you think, what should the groups or a group be covering in the discussion in the breakout session? I don't know, Anke, what do you think? What is the most important point for you to discuss now later on in the breakouts?
In the traders and processor group, I would like to discuss, first of all, let's say the top 3 of the challenges that everybody sees, and then immediately move forwards like to the top 3 or top 5 of those kinds of solutions, or really the what must be done first to get us to the next level.
Thank you very much. Emmanuel, 20 seconds. Emmanuel? Unfortunately, we cannot hear you. Daryl? Oh, sorry, Emmanuel, yes? Emmanuel, we can hear you now. No, we cannot hear you. Unfortunately, the quality is very poor. Emmanuel, I really need to apologize. It doesn't work. The telecommunication connection is too bad. So, Daryl, what are the 1 or 2 key questions that should be addressed in which panel or a breakout session?
Well, more the way forward. So I think the companies need to be working at least 2 levels. Firstly, working in their supply chain, doing HRDD, putting CLMRS into their supply chain, because we can help kids now. But they also need to be working at the pre-competitive level, at the wider level, at the root causes and so on. That takes longer, but it will eventually create fundamental changes that will help all our efforts towards HRDD. Thank you.
Mieke?
For me, for the retail, it would be how can retailers together make a stronger move, really to have more impact. And then the topic on co-investment, how can different actors in the value chain co-invest and monitor about their results?
Okay, perfect. Vidya?
Great. I think for me, there's one question in the chat box, which I think is really good for the standards group to discuss, which is that considering that they're not applicable along the length of the supply chain, but what can standards systems already do to help companies understand the baseline, right, with the data that they have? So Mika has raised this and others. With the data that they already have, to what extent can standard systems help companies that they work with understand the starting point or the baseline on this issue of child labor? And I think one other one from me for maybe all groups actually is what does shared responsibility look like in this field? Everybody, can speak very well to what their organization can do, but clearly it's going to be a mix. So for standard systems, what would shared responsibility from retailers look like, and vice versa?
Excellent. Thank you very much to all the panelists. We covered a lot of ground, and I know that we didn't really cover everything in great detail, but the idea was to get some ideas and now to use the breakout sessions to really go into details and hopefully develop some concrete suggestions. So now it's break time, but before I leave you to get your lunch, just for two remarks. The one is, as you know, we have these 4 different breakout sessions on standard setting organizations, on retailers, on traders, on civil society organizations in cocoa producing countries. If you should have not registered by now, please write in the chat now, indicate your preferred breakout session. Really important, you will be automatically distributed to your breakout session approximately at 1:10 or so. And it's really important that you stay logged into WebEx so that we can directly transfer you. And obviously, during the break, you might not want to be seen eating or so. So switch off your video and mute yourself. And then at 1:10, be back at your laptop. You will be transferred to your breakout session. And then at 1:15, we should directly kick off. Thank you very much for your all the contributions that you made. Then now enjoy the lunch, get some rest and some coffee or whatever. And then at 1:10, be back at your laptop. And at 1:15, we will directly continue. And don't forget that you should not switch off the WebEx thing, but just mute yourself and stop video. Thank you very much. we will manage to get this joint wrap-up session as compact as possible. So I all hope that you had a good discussion, and thank you very much for the active contributions already. And I would like to now, first of all, ask the four moderators of the breakouts to quickly summarize what they learned. And then we want to reflect together with you what we take from the event today and how to take and carry this forward. So let us first come to breakout session 1. Which role can standard setting organizations play for the implementation of human rights due diligence? Charles, what were the key takeaways? What are they?
No, thank you very much, Christian, and thanks also to the whole group for the participation. We also had a very good discussion, and we're also at a limit of rounding up when we came back into plenary. So it is clear that this this space for discussion is highly welcomed. I think even virtually, we had the chance to really discuss things amongst stakeholders and make expectations more clear toward each other. So there was first a discussion on what role and responsibility, of course, and what can certifiers or standard organizations deliver, and where does their responsibility stop. So there was a bit of a discussion there also on this specific issue of responsibility. So here, at the end of the discussion, what was important to remember is that this is a shared responsibility, and so that it is not not the right way to go to try to split up that responsibility, because in the end you might end up in a situation where responsibility shifted towards others in supply chains. And so even linguistically, it's important that we really see this as a shared responsibility and not split this up. Of course, within a shared responsibility, there's different roles and functions. And so this is where there is definitely a need for more precision. We need to be more precise on the roles and functions of stakeholders along the supply chain, because what we see is that otherwise it is very difficult to talk about these responsibilities. And so there is definitely a need for more precision and a need for more knowledge and more respect on who does what. To say in a simplistic way, and of course this was a much broader discussion, but I'll try not to give a full review here. But there is of course a role for certification within due diligence processes, but we cannot put the two processes on the same line. Certification is in a certain way a service provider that will help their clients to fill in part of their due diligence process, but due diligence of course is much bigger than that. On the other hand, what we see is that especially with the high level of ambitions of the different national platforms, where we all in this together, right? There is a need for more actions, and so there's also a demand towards certifiers to do more, or to deliver more, or to share more information. And so clearly there's a role there in terms of service providing that can be grown. But to do so, again, we need to have these transparent relationships where the needs of each actor becomes much more clear. Two last important points that I want to make here. There was this question this issue that was raised of being careful of not putting extra burden on farmers, because of course everyone will start with their due diligence processes, but we need to be aware that we might end up in a situation where farmers or cooperatives are demanded to respect a wide variety of different sets of standards. So there's a real attention point there. And on the role of MSIs or multi-stakeholder initiatives, this is really this safe space where we can have these discussions to hold each other accountable, share best and worst practices, participate together in the current EU approach and legislative process, and invest in getting more clarity on the data that we should share with each other to be able to move forward collectively.
Thank you very much, Charles. Anything that really surprised you? Or anything that you thought that was brilliant that you've never thought about? One sentence.
Well, that really stood out. I think it's you feel that that there's ambitious. You know, everyone wants to move forward, and everyone wants to be able to take extra steps. We've seen in this group that there are some actors for who certification is a particularly relevant tool, but they have growing demands towards certifiers. The certification organizations also are really intensively looking for and developing more solutions to deliver these services. But there you can feel that ambition might be our best asset to move forward.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Charles, and thank you very much to the whole group. Now I'm speaking of the results of the second group that I moderated. How can retailers effectively collaborate with each other and with other actors to implement human rights due diligence? We asked first the question also, what is the responsibility of retailers? Where does it start and where does it end? I think, first of all, there was a clear recognition that obviously retailers, despite the fact that they might be quite late in the supply chain, play a very important role, and a particular high role when it comes to their own private labels. There, obviously, they might not have the same responsibility of other chocolate, cocoa products producers, but it's relatively high because they can control more or less control what goes into their products. Secondly, what we said is the responsibility of retailers obviously is also to connect producers and the products with consumers in order to create also consumer awareness and consumer demand for more sustainably produced products and to translate this demand into more demand for sustainably sourced products. And thirdly, obviously, they have a quite impact on the price and whether it is chocolate or chocolate products is sold very cheaply or whether it's not sold. So there's a big set of responsibilities that retailers actually have. When it comes to the second question, how can retailers empower their suppliers and what agreements are needed? We obviously said that for their own products, obviously they need to do the whole due diligence process. They need to have supplier evaluation and monitoring and so on and so forth. And they need to obviously need to translate it into their practices. When it comes to the other brands, what they obviously need to do is they need to engage with the other brands in a dialogue, what they would like their products to look like. And they could obviously should set examples of how they do it in comparison to the brands. And obviously they should also learn from the other brands how they incorporate sustainability and responsibility with regard to human rights in their products. Thirdly, we said, okay, retailers alone won't be able to do it. There is a shared responsibility, as Charles had just mentioned. We discussed the role of traders and said, okay, particularly for the first mile traceability, traders can play a very important role in addition to the standards. But there is a need for much greater transparency. And here we said a multi-stakeholder initiative can and should play a big role and also for conducting pilots. But we then also learned about not so positive examples of multi-stakeholder initiatives where collaboration between brands wasn't possible or didn't happen because these brands said, okay, why should I cooperate with a competitor? Because then I won't be able to tell my story, and I want to tell my story. That's why I do not collaborate with others on pilot products. And there was therefore a call that multi-stakeholder initiatives obviously need to celebrate their achievements, but obviously also need to reflect on what they do not achieve and try to learn lessons from it. Guess that were hopefully the main points, and thank you very much to my group. And now we are coming to the third session. How can the responsibility for human rights due diligence of traders and processing companies with special consideration of small and medium enterprises be effectively shared? Christine.
Yeah, we also started our discussion by saying that we don't speak about each individual responsibility because everybody has a shared responsibility in human rights due diligence, and that it's much more about collaboration. And especially also collaboration with both producing and consuming country governments. Some chocolate companies, which were also part of our discussion, they said they would actually expect from traders to have full responsibility over human rights diligence. And some SMEs said, yes, this was difficult for them to achieve. But then we said, we came to the role of multi-stakeholder initiatives versus traders. And I think there we had a really interesting discussions, because we recognize that traders are the ones in a position closest to the farmers. They're actually the ones collecting data. But then there needs to be, we spoke about tools and instruments. Their legislation can actually provide an incentive for more transparency on the exchange of data. And then the role of multi-stakeholder initiatives comes in actually not just collecting the data, but then also sharing experience and have some learning. So the traders are the ones responsible for collecting data, and the multi-stakeholder initiatives more for the sharing of experiences and learnings. And also, especially for SMEs, the role of multi-stakeholder initiatives is very important, because it enables them to implement human rights due diligence. Finally, about the role of producing and consuming country governments, it was said that consuming country governments could really support the producing countries in creating an enabling environment, enabling policies, etc., and that the role of producing country governments was really to promote local conversations and also come up with the infrastructure, etc., needed to really ground the basis for human rights due diligence.
Thank you very much, Christine. And also the question to you, was there something that surprised you or that really stood out, or where you thought, in this light, we haven't discussed it yet in our multi-stakeholder initiatives, that was new?
I think what I already mentioned, the discussion I found interesting is really that, although we started off, it's a shared responsibility. I think really traders do have a responsibility in collecting data, but they need to be supported by a level playing field, and that the responsibility of the multi-stakeholder initiatives is about learning. So we share the cake, but still each has its own function.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Session 4, which role can local civil society organizations in cocoa producing countries play for the effective identification of human rights violations and the implementation of grievance mechanisms? Beate, what were the key results in your group?
Yeah, thank you, Christian. I will report, we had a very vivid, interesting discussion, although the time was too short. First of all, we started with selecting some kind of best practices and experience which are already existing in the collaboration with civil society, especially with regard to child labor. And I must say there is existing already a lot. I see in the work of the companies, ICI, the standard organizations, civil societies are already integrated. However, it was mentioned in the group that in general, funds are lacking to support and empower, especially the local civil society organizations. They need to have more access to information. They should be involved in the researches which are taking place and so on. And funding often is an important issue. Because they have to travel also if they would like to participate in the specific actions. And of course, their manpower has to be financed. And another important task or role of this local civil society organizations can also be or should be to inform the workers, the farmers and the people especially on their rights they have, and to develop trust among the different actors. This was mentioned also as a very important role. With regards to mechanisms and tools, we concentrated principally on the grievance mechanism. We discussed an example of FlowCert. The grievance mechanism which FlowCert is using and in the connection with the fair trade certification. There was a new WhatsApp mechanism added to this grievance mechanism, which was, I think, quite successful. So within short times, they had were delivered quite a lot of complaints. And here it was discussed if this, it was explained, this grievance mechanism, and then it was discussed if that could play, if what we can learn from this grievance mechanism to develop grievance mechanisms for a sector or for a supply chain in the producing countries, because that is what is foreseen under the UN guidelines for business and human rights. And we do not have many, let's say, many examples at the moment where we can learn from. So that was a very good discussion. Yeah, it was mentioned also that we should clearly distinguish between civil society organizations and farmer organizations, and develop more the role of those different organizations, which specific roles they have, and yeah, that we should learn also from other sectors. I think that was it, more or less. With regard to local governments, there should be structures developed to develop or to develop possibilities to stronger engage with the local governments. Yeah. And with regard to multi-stakeholder initiatives, I draw the conclusion, we didn't discuss it anymore in our working group because the time was too short, but I draw the conclusion that we should have a closer look also how we can involve local civil society organizations in our work, and how we can strengthen the relation between civil society in our multi-stakeholder platforms and civil society in the producing countries.
Thank you very much, Beate. That sounds like a really, really interesting workshop. Now let us come towards the end of this whole event. And if you remember correctly what I said at the beginning, or what the chairs also said at the beginning, the overall objective of today's conference was to discuss together with you and together with the expert the different roles and responsibilities of actors along the cocoa supply chain and what we should be doing to improve it. And we had input sessions by the chairs. We had a presentation on what is going on in Switzerland. We had an intervention by EU Commissioner Dear Reinders. We had a best practice input. We had a panel discussion where we tried to elaborate a little bit on all these issues. And we had the 4 breakout sessions. If you were to tell your husband or your wife after this conference what you did, what you took away from today's conference, what would you tell her or him? So what is your key takeaway from today's conference? And put it into one word. So go to menti.com, use the code 2435150, and then what is your key takeaway for today? It's just one word that you can type in. I think it takes a little bit of time for the application to refresh. I hope at least that it's not the little input, but I guess, yeah, wow, that looks much better now. Okay. I think that we wait for another refresh. And one more, and then I will reflect upon it. Okay, Great. And I won't wait for one more refresh because then it gets too small. I guess, you know, a very prominent theme obviously is shared responsibility, but there are other elements which go into the same direction, such as together, collaborative action, holistic supply chain wide responsibility. Okay, so that's the one thing, collaboration, shared responsibility. The other words are action, local action, act now, urgency. That is this. Then we have the role of different elements, strengthening civil society, for example, seriousness, raising the bar. We had someone saying that only laws will achieve the change necessary. And obviously, in addition to the shared responsibility, there is also a self-responsibility. So I think what you said, what are your key takeaways from today? It is share responsibility, action now, strengthen civil society, be serious, don't waste time, talk and take action, work on transparency, raising the bar, being accountable, working on transparency, working on prices, and being holistic. Okay, so these are the key takeaways from your side. And now I would like to invite the three representatives from the three boards to meet to the final wrap up. So Charles, from your perspective, what did you type in? What was your overall takeaway from today's conference?
Thank you, Christian. I hope you can hear me fine.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, my takeaway is indeed I typed in shared. I didn't put in responsibility because I think it's more than that. We need to be able to share insights, to share data. I like the fact that that also in the breakout session we talked also about sharing failures, and sometimes we can learn much more from failures than from the good practices. And so to me, this is essential, and this is also the role that the multi-stakeholder initiatives aim to achieve, create this safe environment where we can, together with all the stakeholders that are relevant in this, talk about this, be more precise indeed in defining our expectations towards one another, and also create a safe space where we can challenge each other in order to really be able to make progress. I think the fact that that a legal framework is coming up is actually a great opportunity for all the stakeholders in the national initiatives to take a step ahead. I think and this discussion today shows it. The discussion is well alive and well advanced. So now we would need to take action. And this is exactly also what we seek to do with Beyond Chocolate, is try to set up and create these collaborations where we can start implementing high impact models, because that is what we are looking for.
Thank you very much, Charles. And I just realized that I haven't really properly introduced you, Beate and Christine, because you are the secretaries of the three different multi-stakeholder initiatives. And which brings me now to Beate, the leading the secretariat of the German initiative. Beate, when it comes to multi-stakeholder initiatives and their role in all of this, what is your takeaway for the role of multi-stakeholder initiatives, and in particular for the three that are hosting this event?
Thank you, Christian. The expressions we just saw before, sharing, shared responsibility, collaboration, holistic approach, that is really what we are at the heart of the sustainable cocoa initiatives are working for. So our objective is to bring people together, to share experience, to collaborate, and all into the direction that the sustainable cocoa sector will be a reality in the future. And I think with these workshops, we are contributing to this. This is our first joint workshop among those 3 initiatives, and I think it was very interesting and successful, and it contributes really to an exchange among our members. And I think these workshops are really good instruments to see where the discussion is going on, to contribute to a harmonization of the discussion, and also to a harmonization of strategies among our initiatives, and especially with regard to our 4 core challenges we have identified at the level of our initiatives. So I'm really pleased with the result, and we will document it well, that you can have a look at all the different contributions. And I would like to recommend to continue with it, to organize other events, other important issues, and that will help us to harmonize our strategies, as I said before, and also to help the different actors in our initiatives with regard to improve their actions, and also with regard to concerted and joint actions across our different actors. And that is necessary in a holistic approach. So that's I learned for our multi-stakeholder initiatives.
Thank you very much, Beate. Christine, it must have been, or you must have invested days and days to organize this event and attracting all these distinguished speakers together with the other platforms. So at the end of it, have your expectations that you had at the beginning of the meeting been met? You're muted.
My expectations are even topped, because I'm overwhelmed by the participation of more than 180 participants from all the 3 national initiatives. So that is just great to have the discussion with so many stakeholders. And I think we're getting a bigger and bigger family. So it's not just the single initiatives talking to each other, we're really exchanging across the initiatives. And this, I think that is what we want to achieve. So from that point, my expectations have been really more than met. And I think it's also what has been mentioned. It's about, I was a bit afraid that today, maybe from experience from other workshops, rather than pushing around the hot potatoes, I think today everybody acknowledged that everyone has its responsibility, that it's a shared responsibility. We want to collaborate, we need to take action, and I think this is a big step forward that has really come out today. And I think their legislation, be it on the European level or on the Swiss level, is clearly a push, but it's also an incentive. So I'm really happy about the discussions that we had today, and I'm clearly looking forward to collaborating with our partner initiatives to implement human rights due diligence. Maybe we should even make that a 5th challenge in our common collaboration, because it's really the ground for everything. Thank you very much to my partner initiatives and to everybody that has been really proactively participating today.
Thank you very much, Christine. We are now coming to an end, and what I like to invite you to do now is to switch on the video and to change to grid view. Could you please switch on video and change to grid view? You know, all these numbers are so abstract when we hear about more than 100 participants. And now suddenly you see all the faces of all the people that have participated in this event. And I think that this is really, really, really impressive. So these are all the people who spent this day in this conference because they believe that this is a really important issue. So let me thank you for your participation and for all the contributions that you made throughout the event. Let me thank the speakers, particularly also from African countries, from the European Commission, and from so many member organizations to actively engage in this. Let me thank the organizers of the event for putting together such a great program and to making all this possible, and also for the technical assistance. And I hope you good luck with all your great work that you're doing. And hopefully all what you're doing will have a great impact on the farmers and their families in the producing countries. And maybe let us all say goodbye and thank you by raising your hands. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you very much for everybody who made this event possible. Thank you and goodbye, and we hope to see you again at a later stage and in a different conference or wherever. Bye-bye.